All right, welcome to another edition, a very special edition of Radio Waves. My name is Mike Stark.
And I'm Richard Wagoner.
And we are here with some legends. Richard, why don't you introduce the gentlemen that are with us today?
Well, they are two amazing people. Let me get to the one that I actually knew first. I met him when I was an intern at Magic 106, and he kind of took me under his wings and taught me things and made me realize eventually that I probably shouldn't go in the industry. Douglas Brown.
I think I served you well.
Yes. And a guy that we've been trying to get into interview for a long time.
Stop. Right. I'm gonna help with this introduction. Right. Here we go.
Chuck Martin, 93 KHJ.
That's it. He is one of my radio heroes because he took a station and brought it back to greatness. And I respect him so much for that. And he also was the man behind K-West 106, which is one of my favorite ones from late high school, early college. And that is Chuck Martin.
Nice to be here. Thank you, Richard. It's when you planned this interview, and it's been coming out for about 3 or 4 years
right.
now. You've been trying to get me in there. I'm glad to be here because it was a very special time, not only for me, but for almost every radio broadcaster in the country, because we all know what KHJ in the broadcast industry meant to everybody. You know, you guys who are from L.A., you've always known that KHJ was a super radio station, but for those of us in the 60s and 70s and 80s, I mean, you know, KHJ was probably the top rung of the broadcast ladder. Every single disc jockey in America wanted to sit behind the microphone at KHJ. Yes. I can remember Charlie Fox, who, when we were in our waning days at KHJ and we knew there was going to be a big change coming from corporate, Charlie Fox, who I got from KFI, put him in afternoon drive, and when he got a job, because I told all the jocks, you need to look out for yourself. It's time to get a job somewhere, and Charlie Fox did, and it was his last day. And I can remember distinctly listening to his sign-off, and, you know, he did his thing. Charlie Fox, I'm a thing. I love Southern California. And to sit here at this microphone where legends have sat before, he said, before I leave, let me say it just one more time. 93 KHJ.
Yes.
And, you know, just to hear that reverence that Charlie Fox gave, I mean, it's something that'll stay with me forever. It was a grand time. But, you know, we heard that jingle, the Rhythm of Southern California. That was a package that came after my Johnny Mann. I brought the Johnny Mann jingles back on the air.
Those are the originals.
Oh, were they the originals? They just sounded so good. Every time one of those hit the air, boy, I'll just tell you, you felt thunder and lightning hit, particularly with Paul Frees on the top of the hour.
The rhythm of Southern California.
93 KHJ.
Los Angeles.
And I remember when we were doing the session on that, which cost me $1,000 a whack. But when I said, you know, on Los Angeles,
1979.
Yeah, I was in San Francisco, and when he did the thing, I said, I wanted you to go way low on the Los Angeles, and he went so low. He said, "Oh, I think I hurt myself." But those were great jingles, but. The Rhythm of Southern California, which was a remake that I did with Tuesday Production with Bo Donovan, I actually won a Clio Award for that.
Yes,
yeah.
I heard about that. Douglas told me about that.
I won a Clio Award.
Yeah, those stand up today. They still sound great. Tuesday knew what they were doing, and you did too.
Well, I told Bo, I said, I'm going to be taking the Johnny Mann jingles off the air because we were getting charged a fortune for using those. I mean, nobody paid more than KHJ did for the use of those. And I used them for a while, and they served their purpose. I went with the original, and then we went with the double A package. The double A pack, the Motown pack, yeah. And I used them both, and I think there was a time, Doug, you would know better, where I combined both packages.
Yeah, we mixed them up.
We mixed them up.
What would work best in 1979, 80 from that period. But it was mostly the double-A package, and we did the Christmas jingle.
Yeah.
Brought that out of retirement and such.
Now, just to clarify for everyone listening, I want to point out Chuck is the program director extraordinaire as well as a personality from before. Douglas was the production director during a lot of it, and I know that Chuck feels, I may be putting words in your mouth, but I know that you told me before that Douglas is one of your favorite production people.
At KHJ, I was so fortunate because running radio is the years that I have. I've had the experience of having engineers of all kind at different radio stations. Some were decent. None of them were great. Some of them needed to get out of the business, quite frankly. When I walked into KHJ, I had the great fortune of having the great Bob Cantor as the sound engineer, took care of everything in there. He was probably the preeminent engineer that you'd ever want to run into in broadcasting. He was just the top of the ladder. I have yet to hear one person in radio say that he wasn't at the top of his game. And the other thing was our production engineer, Douglas Brown. There was nothing that Doug, and I'm sure I drove Doug crazy too. I mean, I can remember when I came in, we were buying records because, somebody robbed after John Sebastian went in there and he wanted to go AOR, our record library was diminished. So we were buying records left and right. And so there was one record, and he was working round the clock to get what I wanted on the air. And he loaded up B.B. King, The Thrill Is Gone. And, in the old days, they would kind of cut down some of the songs. Right. But there's certain songs that you can't do that to. One of them was the very end of the B.B. King song, Thrill Is Gone. Dee, 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 on the guitar thing there. Right. And it was low level. And I came to Doug and I said, Doug, I need this in here. And he put it in there, but it was on the fade out. And I said, Doug, you got to bring it up. You got to bring. Now, that was a hard job because in stations previous, you'd get all that ambient noise.
Turntable rumble and everything.
Turntable rumble. Well, he had a way of getting that out. I said, how did you do it? He said, it's all up here.
Yeah, there you go.
But promos. I mean, I had the great promo extraordinaire, Bobby Ocean, the legend Bobby Ocean. And nobody could cut a promo like Bobby Ocean, even to this day. And I would give Bob, tell him what I wanted. He would write the copy and be to the magic that these two guys would go through. Because I would tell Bobby what I wanted. And then Doug would come in and he'd say, hey, Chuck, you got a moment? Come on in. Yeah. I would go in. Bobby would be there. He'd be there. Press the button. And what I would hear, there was hardly a time that I would say, no, change that. Hardly a time, because it was just so perfect. Sound effects, music, intros, jumpers, connectors. It was just amazing what would come out of that radio speaker. And this is the guy right here who made the magic happen.
Well, it's chemistry. Ocean and I just hit it off.
Boy, did you guys ever.
We were in sync, and we were in sync before you arrived, actually. So that, because I was at KHJ like 4 years before you arrived, and Ocean had come in before that. And so I was working with Charlie Van Dyke and these guys. I had gotten up to the KHJ speed as quickly as I could. So I was ready for you, Chuck, when you showed up. And especially after Michael Spears and John Sebastian. Boy, was I ready to I was ready to rock.
Yeah.
It was quite interesting because the KHJ engineering staff were a whole bunch of pros. I mean, really. I mean, these were the boss engineers, if you can imagine, the board ops from
boss
the day.
Radio,
right. And there was a lot of holdover. I was kind of a late arrival. I didn't come along till 74, but still, I mean, we were all just absolutely obsessed with getting it just right. Getting that segue in the right spot. So when I got to take, say, the end of All Along the Watchtower and stretch it clear out to the end to get it to that last note, and I get a memo from Chuck saying, You did it. You got it all. Same thing with All You Need Is Love by the Beatles. You got to go clear out to the end, right?
Clear out to the end.
Because people don't realize that there was really one guy, one set of ears, who did all the music quality control during those years. I transferred everything. Every cart was mine. So I took a lot of pride in that. The listeners, I suppose, didn't really know the difference, but we pushed the envelope to make sure between Bob Canner's chief engineer duties and give me all the right tools, and then having somebody with some TLC to actually, execute with those tools. That was part of the great sound of KHJ. We were stereo. Hell, I would A/B the FM top 40 stations with KHJ and AM stereo. We sounded better.
Boy, didn't we
actually
ever.
Sounded better than the FMs. The AM stereo, of course, fizzled out. But my gosh, we sounded great because of the engineering skill that was there and the fact that I'd take the extra effort to make it sizzle.
I think what we're hearing right now is the fact that back in those days, the people that worked at these radio stations, you mentioned Douglas TLC, adding TLC to it. There was a lot of TLC put into all of the work that you guys did compared to a lot of what we get today, right?
Well, that's probably what carried the station over some of the PDs.
You see, that was one of...
It didn't hurt. It didn't hurt to have us.
I mean, that was one of the things that I instilled. I tried to instill, and I believe that I accomplished it, was getting every single person who was on the staff, and no matter what category that they contributed to the sound of the radio station, that they had to take an interest in the finite details. If there was something, and I still have PDs tell me this to this day, that when they listened to KHJ, there was things that other places would go unnoticed, but they were very noticeable because every single little detail was put together. There's something that Paul Drew, and my wife and I, we talk about this because we were at dinner, and this was in Jacksonville, Florida. It was the third station that I worked under Paul Drew. And he said, there's not much I have to do when I come into town. He says, I guide you along, he said, but I always know a Chuck Martin radio station, he says, because it has a sparkle. There's a sparkle in your style. There's a Paul Drew who, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of guys you put in separate categories, and Mike and I were talking earlier about Ron Jacobs. Now, Ron Jacobs is he's in a class by himself. He's a hard guy to understand. You talk to people about Paul Drew, and he's a hard guy to understand. Somehow, Paul and I had, to this day, I say it's because of our stature. We're both of the same height. And what do we call it? Horizontally challenged. and Paul being that kind of a guy from the first station that he hired me for in New Haven. I heard about him. I didn't know if I even wanted to take a job with him. People would tell me what he was about. You better prepare to be shocked and in the middle of the night and this and that. And I said, I don't even know if I want to work with this guy. It was kind of scary. I never had a problem with him because we always, whatever thing there was, we always had it worked out and so forth. He knew what he wanted and the sound that he wanted. Formatically, if you didn't need a whole lot of direction, he would leave you alone. And I heard that from a lot of program directors. Now, a lot of people he went up against Charlie and Hal Martin, who was
Michael Spears,
and so forth. That they will tell you a different story. But those who really knew what Paul was inside, he wanted you to be the best that you could be, and he gave you the latitude.
So he trusted you.
He trusted you as long as he saw results. Right. As long as he saw results, he would allow you to program the station the way you wanted. Now, a lot of program directors over the years have said, well, that wasn't your format. That was Drew. He wanted you to. No, that's not true at all. Drew would allow you to put your format together. He would allow you to have the personalities that you wanted. There were a few times he came up against me about what personalities. I had to fight tooth and nail to get Rick Dees into KHJ because they didn't want me to rob Memphis, which was an RKO station too. He came from HBQ in Memphis, and he owned the market there. And when I took over, I didn't really, when I took over, I told the disc jockeys, I was told to come in the next day after I was hired with Dwight Case, and he said, you come in the next day at noon. We're going to let Sebastian go in the morning, and it'll be fine to come in at noontime, and you just handle things from there. I can remember I went in and I said to Doug right away, card up those jingles, get them ready, the old-time jingles. They weren't ready till I put the format in, but over the weekend, and it was on a Friday, if I remember correctly.
Sounds
it was
right.
on a Friday.
That sounds right.
That's when you get fired, on a Friday.
Usually at Christmas.
Yeah, usually when the general manager says, you want to come in here, have a seat? And he says, you want to close the door? When they say close the door, you say, listen, there's nothing else to say. Do I get severance or not? So anyway, I came in at noon, and I had Sean call my secretary. I had her call all the disc jockeys and everybody. I wanted a staff meeting at 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, whatever it was. I had a lunch in there. And I said to the disc jockeys, I said, first and foremost, never mind this all music, KHJ. That was Steve Miller. And before that, we heard Blondie. More music coming on KHJ.
Don't forget Cashmere by Led Zeppelin and Afternoon Drive.
I told the disc jockeys, I said, look, there's no format. Right now, you go on there and talk. Bring it up. Get alive. Energy. Bring it right back on. Play whatever music you wanted. There is no format. Now, I'm driving home afterward, and I'm listening on the radio, and I think it was Ocean I had in afternoon at that time. And, man, the energy level, there was nothing. There was no music. We had 50 records we played over and over and over again and stuff. But the energy level was so phenomenal to hear these legendary disc jockeys actually talking and bright and alive, happy to be alive. And so I said, boy, we're on the right track. So anyway, as I'm listening to the station over the next few days, I knew that I had to get in a morning man. Charlie Tuna was there, but Charlie, what a great guy and what a consummate pro. I knew that I had to take him out of morning. He was the old style KHJ, and a lot of the what people remember of KHJ was exactly what I wanted to bring in and renew on the format, because it was necessary. It was vital. It was a death knell, and I had to straighten that out, and I knew it. And the foundation of every broadcast day is in the morning. If you don't have a good, strong morning, you're not going to carry on to the rest of the day parts. So I went around the country listening to guys. I took a week. I believe it was about a week to 10 days, and I'd go into markets not telling anybody I was there. I knew where the good personalities were. And I would sit and listen to them in their natural environment. Not that Chuck Martin's in town from KHJ and they're auditioning me and so forth. I didn't want any of that. I went to Chicago and San Francisco and Miami and New York, and I just didn't hit it. And at the time, Disco Duck was the hit.
Right.
Okay? Disco Duck by Rick
What a
Dees
classic
was
song
the hit.
that is.
Absolutely. Real meaning. Real.
They just don't write them like that anymore.
Well, yeah. We want songs that have real meaning, something you could take away from. Well, I said, I'm going to go to Memphis. I'm going to do that. So I held up in town one day. I was amazed at what I heard. I stayed another day. Then I went back and I talked to Dwight Case. And I said, I'm looking for a morning man. And I had carte blanche. They told me what I needed to do, what they expected. And that's a whole other story in the meeting of how I went about getting the job at KHJ to begin with, the programming job anyway.
We have to get into that in more detail later.
Yeah, there's quite a story there, too. And so I said, Dwight, I said, I don't know how to tell you. I want Rick Dees. He said, did you... He said, we're going to have to talk about that. And so there was a meeting with Paul Drew, Dwight Case, me, and Tim Sullivan. And I said, there's no two ways about it, guys. I said, I got to have Rick Dees. I don't know how we're going to do it. I want him. I know it's going to be a concession to get him out of HBQ in Memphis. I said, but that's up to you guys. You're telling me what do I want? I said, listen, I've just spent 10 days on the road, holed up in a suitcase. I've been all around the country here. I said, there's no two ways about it. I got to have Rick Dees. So we went back and forth, and then the lawyers got involved because it wasn't an easy negotiation, because little did I know that Rick Dees was making more money in Memphis than we were able to pay him in Los Angeles. I mean, he was there a long time, and he owned the market. He owned everything, and he was a dynasty back there. So I let the lawyers do the negotiating because I said, once I found out the figure that he was making, I said, let the lawyers handle that. And they did. And along the line, to make it work, right, I had to have a second salary, a giant salary for Julie Dees, who, by the way, was the voice of Casper the Friendly Ghost, as she was a regular on the Jonathan Winter Show on television, the Comedy Hour, and so forth. So to get her part of the morning show, I had to have another salary for Julie. And, of course, she was pregnant with Rick Dees' first child, Kevin. So, and sometimes she wouldn't be there because she'd be sick, and I'd have to answer a lot to, why wasn't Julie in there this morning? Because she became as much of a personality as Rick did, because she had those voices and everything. And she was good. I mean, the two of them together was absolutely phenomenal. And,
do you remember when she first started on the air saying, I'm Barbara Streisand?
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, she's in L.A. She's not in Memphis anymore.
Right.
And Streisand's lawyers are listening.
Oh, boy, did I ever have that one.
Oh, that was great.
Oh, big time. I spent more time with ACLU lawyers and lawyers for personalities and everything. And I can remember one time when Rick, coming from Memphis, and we're going back almost 35, 40 years ago, that things were a little different, racially motivated back then, and Rick made a statement about how they're going to move.
Oh, the rapid transit.
You remember? Hey,
I'll never forget it.
Hey, bro. So
Should we tell that?
Oh, definitely.
Listen,
you got to tell it.
They could cut it out. You can cut it out if you want to.
You got to tell it. You got to tell
You
it.
could cut it out if you want to. But anyway,
I'll tell it.
We
if you
cut
want.
nothing.
I'm writing into the station, and I'm on the road, stuck in traffic. And Rick says, "Yeah," he says, "Did you, Sparky, which was Julie's voice? Did you hear how they're going to improve the rapid transit in Compton and Inglewood?" No, how? Tell us how they're going to do that. They're going to move the trees closer together. Ooh! Oh. In the beginning, I didn't. It took me a moment. It took, because I'm following what he's saying, and I'm trying to get the joke here. So, and it's the tree. And then in about 10 seconds, I said, "Did I just hear what I heard?" So now here's the shot of this. I call Rick right in. I get in my office. I told my secretary, I said, when he gets off the air, you tell him, bring him right to my office. I said, Rick, look, I said, I give you the freedom to do what you have to do, but I told you that when something isn't right, I'm going to step in here, and I want you to listen to me. This is not Memphis. You cannot say that in Los Angeles. This is a whole different city. And he says, and I told him about the trees closer together. He said, well, so what? I said, what you're talking about is apes moving from limb to limb, and it's associated with black people. I said, you can't do that. And he said, well, I didn't say it. Sparky said it. So this is the kind of mentality I had to live with every single day, because Rick and I had close conferences. I mean, he was great. I don't regret bringing Rick Dees to L.A. What he did for me was phenomenal. What he did for Kiss FM was phenomenal. I mean, the guy in his own right was just exactly who he was, Rick Dees. But every now and then you had to step on his toes.
And it showed how genius Rick Dees was in that he never did say things like that. It was always the assistants.
Yeah, I know it. Well, that's the mentality. That's why I say it, Richard. This was the mentality I had to deal with when I brought him in the office. It wasn't he didn't say it, Sparky said it, or one of the other characters said it. And I had a hard time. I used to pull my hair out. And then the shot of that was the ACLU lawyers got in because the suit was filed with the Black Caucus of L.A. And I spent more time in there. They wanted to file a suit. I had to have a special apology, and I had to do the apology on the air. 2 days ago on the Rick D Show, you heard a comment about rapid transit in Inglewood and Compton. Those do not reflect this.
Right.
So, and then we had to make a formal apology, and then we had to make a settlement to raise black awareness in, something. I think it was a $5,000 thing. So that's how we got out of that one. And
had a black mayor at the time.
Yeah, and we had a black mayor at the time too.
That's right.
Yeah, and stuff. So, we had our stuff on that. But anyway, we're talking about bringing in Charlie Tuna, and so. As it turned out, I really wanted Charlie for midday. Mm-hmm. And Charlie would have gone along with it, too. I had a talk with Charlie. When I came back and I made the agreement with Dees, and it was settled that he was coming in before we announced it to the trades. In fact, we had a press conference where we brought Rick Dees. It was a full-line press conference at the Press Club in L.A. And I said... I said to Charlie, I said, I need to make some changes here. It's desperate here. I said, I'd like you to stay on midday. Whatever you say, Captain. That was his thing. He said, whatever you... Charlie was one of the nicest guys you'd ever want to meet in broadcasting. This was one of God's people.
Yeah.
Believe me, Charlie Tuna was just a peach. And so...
He never said anything negative about any of the stations he worked at or any of the programmers he was with.
Nope. He was just a gem. And he was willing to go along when I explained what I had to do. He said, whatever you say. And I thought he would have been good midday because he had that following, long Los Angeles following. Well, as it turned out, with all the money that we had to give to Rick Dees and Julie, and he wouldn't come to L.A. unless he could have his newsman, Terrence McKeever. So that cost me money, too. And plus the moving expense, they had to have a chandelier taken down in their mansion in Memphis, and it had to be just the chandelier alone was an extra $7,000 to have it dismantled, wrapped up, and brought. It had crystals in it and stuff. I mean, just stupid stuff like that. Anyway, it was such a fortune that to keep Charlie on with the money that he was making, they said, we can't do it. The management did. And so I had to let Charlie go. We made it right for him. I mean, he had he did all right on his departure from.
Well, then he
KHA.
moved over to 10Q anyway.
Yeah. So I mean,
his own story just continued.
His career didn't stop,
right?
Not at all. But it just didn't happen for him at KHA, and that's one of my regrets. I really regret that. But the upside was that. Bringing in, doing what I had to do, and having Rick Dees as the foundation of the format, it was a good thing, as everything turned out to be.
Well, take us back just a little bit, because you arrive in Los Angeles. You're at. Well, you first came to KHJ in '77, right?
'77, yeah,
And
I sure did. My background. You were saying my background was, from New England. I started out in New England, and that's where I first ran into Paul Drew, And I was in one station, and then he put me a smaller station, and then he put me into New Haven, which was a pretty good station there, WAVZ. We were in the market with ABC in New York, and they were competitors. And I took the station from a 2.6 to a 10.7.
Wow.
In 2 books. And he got a station in Jacksonville. This would have been my 3rd station for him, a sleepy little FM station, and WIVY is what it was there. And it was against the Big Ape, WAPE. They were a big station there, owned by Sis and the Kaplans. And just a grease man worked there. A lot of people went through that station there. So when we went in there, I had to increase the signal, had to get an engineer in there. I went in there. It was what we call in radio a toilet. It was a real toilet. And so the wattage had to be increased. We had to have a new tower, put it on the Metropolitan Insurance Building downtown, the biggest building. And by the way, Jacksonville, Florida, is the largest city in the United States. You would think New York, Chicago, you would think one of those, right? Area-wise, Jacksonville is the largest city.
Oh,
and
so you have to cover it all.
You have to cover it all, and it was a large station and so forth. So we did. We put it on the air, and within the first book, we went from... we changed the call letters to Y103 and everything. I had, and I got a big budget, and so they had... our first book, billboards. We had a billboard campaign, a news cruiser, a promotional cruiser because the beaches and everything. And so within one book, this is what got me to KHJ. So, it was probably the second biggest feat in my whole broadcast career. We went from a 2.6 to a 10.4 in one book. And APE, who had a 14 share, they were down to a 6.2.
Wow.
In the first book, and the reason I remember that it was 10.4, it was the time of the song Convoy, C.W. McCall.
Yeah, CB
Everybody
radios.
was in the CB radio thing. So one of the promos we put on the air was, we always stymied APE on promotion. And I had this thing where we're having a promotion and next week. It's about cereal. And, and all the APE guys, they're going to be giving away cereal because we had a plant at APE, and they would tell us, look at the guys at Y103. They're going to give away boxes of cereal, and we're giving away $100 bills every hour. Well, the cereal was serial numbers on the thing. And we had serial numbers from the bank, of all the local banks, of what they were giving away in $100 bills. And let's see if you have this number. And if you have it, we'll give you 10 times the value of your money. And it went over real well. Well, the next promotion was that when the book came in at 10.4, it was... and we want to thank you for making us number one. We are, look for big things coming at Y103. We're going to be your community radio station, and we're so happy to be your number one choice. And that's a big 10.4. That was during the time of the thing. So any way we could just jam a little bit to the competition. We were kind of good at that. And I had a guy who I took with me from New Haven, the morning mayor. He was good at writing those kind of promos that would actually antagonize the competition. And it worked well there. Well, anyway, I get a call. This went on 10.4 with the ratings and everything.
That was an FM station?
That was an FM station.
That's unusual for an FM station back then.
And in fact, I think that somebody, John Leader, not John Leader, it was before John Leader. This was in Radio and Records. It's still one of the better success stories in recent years of the recent ratings increase. Building ratings is nothing novel for the Chucker. In the winter of 76, he walked into this sleepy, album-oriented facility, and with his mass appeal expertise, coveted a lagging 11th place to a solid 10.4, number one by the new year, and later this leap to an outstanding 15.7, number one overall in a competitive market.
I always liked one of Drew's things was there's no excuse for number one.
Yeah.
I love that. What a great, that was one of the things about Paul that I really dug that because he would, he's right. Absolutely. You don't have to explain yourself if you're number one.
Yeah, no excuse. Absolutely. I mean, that was some of the good stuff there. Anyway, I got a call shortly after that 15.7, and he called me at now. Oh, my wife got the call, and he said, "I want him to call me. Here's my at home. I'll be home. Have him call me. It's very important." And I got in from the station. It was like 8 o'clock. She said, "You got to call Paul right away. You got to let's have dinner." "No," he said, "it's important. You got to call him. You got to call him." All right, so I give Paul a call. I said, "Paul, Chuck." He says, "Chuck," he says, "how you doing?" I said, I'm doing fine." I said, "Geez, things are going great here." "Well," he says, "I got some bad news for you." I said, "Oh, what?" He said, "Are you ready for the bad news?" I said, "Oh, Paul, is it that bad?" He said, "Bad enough for you to have a seat." I said, "All right, tell me when you're seated." I said, "Okay, I'm seated." I wasn't seated. I'm pacing. And he says, "You're done at Y103. He said, "I want you to clean out your office." I said, "Oh, when?" "Effective immediately." He said, "You're no longer the program director of Y103. I said, "Paul, are you kidding?" I said, "I just took this station to what it is. Are you kidding?" He said, "No." He says, "You're just not going to be the program." And he's carrying this out. I won't bore you. But he's carrying this thing out.
Your stomach dropped at that time.
And I'm saying, I mean, I'm getting flushed. I'm getting red. I'm getting pissed. I'm mad. And he says, "Because you're not going to be there." He says, "I got a place for you in another radio station." I said, "Oh, where?" And he says, "You're coming to Los Angeles." And I figured, oh, well, where am I going in Los Angeles? K-Earth or whatever? Mm-hmm. He says, "You're going to be the program director of KHJ." He said, "But this is how it's going to be." He said, "You're coming in there as assistant PD under Michael Spears. You're going to be weekend air personality. You're going to be a disc jockey, and you're going to assist in promos." He says, "You're going to be assisting the promotion department." Mm-hmm. And he says, and weekend disc jockey, and you're going to be assistant to Michael Spears, but we're not telling Michael Spears yet. He says, because Michael's going to be leaving. Now, you have to understand.
So they knew Michael was leaving.
Of course. Right. The station was on the downturn. KHJ, this big, giant radio station, the flagship of RKO, over those last years under Michael Spears, it was going down and down and down.
Is this before John Sebastian? Or
yes, before John Sebastian.
Exactly.
Yeah, just before
they didn't know how far down it could go.
And what was the nature? What was the nature of the format under Spears?
Well, it was a bubblegum. The best way I could describe KHJ when I came to Los Angeles was your typical bubblegum radio station in a market where you certainly didn't need bubblegum music.
Well, there was another aspect to this, too. This was at the time when the pop music audience was migrating to FM.
Oh, big time.
The balance was, and so
big time.
So one of Michael's things that this always bugged me because I had to execute it is he insisted that every record we add be no longer than 3 minutes and 35 seconds.
Oh boy.
Okay, this is 1977.
Even if you had to chop a big portion of the record off.
Right, and that was my job to cut these things up. And it so bugged me because I thought, wait a minute, the FM stations are playing all of it, and we're playing some weird ass edit,
Right.
What kind of credibility does that give us? Even if you could wait through Sean Cassidy to hear a good record, you're going to hear the Eagles cut down or something like this. I thought, oh my gosh, it was almost suicidal.
And which was just the opposite of what I wanted in the music. I'm getting him. Right. Get the ding, ding, ding.
Get it all on the
on the thing. So, yeah, I mean, it was going down. The morale inside KHJ was abominable. Because I have a certain way of how I programmed radio stations. Listen, this is years later now, and I'm just saying how all the disc jockeys to this day, if you go on some of the radio sites here, talk about the atmosphere that I created within the radio station because I wanted a fun atmosphere.
Yeah.
When I went into KHJ, I mean, it was like everybody was scared of their shadow. And Michael, it was obvious that they didn't have respect for him, and everybody was talking behind the back in program. You can't have that. That creates chaos.
Right.
There's no teamwork. And I picked that up right away, and that was something that I was really in focus with. But I had to keep my mouth closed because Drew, who was the president of programming for RKO, he was the president, and he said, "You're going to be assistant PD, but it's not going to be announced until we need it. So you just keep a low profile. You're going in there for promotion. You're an weekend disc jockey." Well, when I went in there, they certainly didn't need any promotion with Bobby Ocean and this guy over here. So I was getting paid for just being a weekend disc jockey, and if somebody got sick, I went on the air, and that was it. And that went on for a year. And everything. Well, it just so happened, and here's something that will all come together now. Paul Drew got a job with Radio Marti, and he left RKO.
Okay.
And so it was announced, and I'm saying, what about me? I'm assistant PD, but it's not announced that I'm assistant PD. And so what about me? And I'm trying to call Paul Drew, and he's not returning my calls.
Yeah.
So the next thing I know, a little time went by, like a week, 10 days, and John Sebastian is coming in. They let Michael go, and I became interim PD, assistant PD. Chuck Martin's the assistant PD, he's interim PD. And so I'm figuring, okay, well, here we go. So little did I know John Sebastian's the new PD. So I go up to the general manager, and I said, how does that strike with me? I said, Paul Drew brought me in here to be program director. And, well, Paul Drew, he says, listen, he said, I don't know. He said, that's not up to me. He said, why don't you just get with John Sebastian and see what he's got in store for you? Well, I'm not at KHJ just to have a job here.
Right.
I'm a program director, and, I'm not going to sit here as a promotion guy with nothing to do because they got Bobby Ocean, the best in the business, and this guy doing the production. So, and I'm assistant PD with nothing to do. So I went right to Dwight Case. And he said, we just wanted to go in a direction we had to go. He said, quite frankly, we knew you were here, but some connections were put together where John's got this format together, and with the infiltration of FM now, he said, we know our competition is coming from FM. It was kind of a enlightening to even the RKO folks that this AM giant here, this big flagship here, we're running into these problems all over the country. Right. And FM is on the rise. So this John Sebastian, he's going to do something here with this format, and we're going to go with him. I figured, well, all right. So I waited for John to come in, and John knew of me, and he said, I could use you with research and everything, and which is what we did. And my wife and I, we've come up with a research thing for the market, and we did it. He had his own research, which was another guy. My wife and I were trying to think of this the other day. Casey.
Oh, yeah.
What was it?
Steve Casey.
Steve Casey,
yeah.
Who went on to MTV later on.
He was an early IT guy. He was into computers.
Yes, absolutely. So he still used our research, and then he wanted me on the air. He liked me on the air, and he wanted me to go on the air. Well, we're here. We just bought a home. Being in radio, you don't buy anything, anything that's not glued down,
right.
and save the boxes. You're going to need the boxes for the U-Haul truck. So that was kind of instilled upon us. So. And we had a home and everything, and I said, all right, I'll try this John Sebastian thing. So, and he's telling us, no more KHJ. KHJ, bring it down here. Talk like this. Be real. Listen to KMET and KLOS, and you just talk. Non-affected. Everything is not. That was his word. Non-affected.
Apparently, he didn't listen to KMET.
Just non-affective. KHJ, and that was Steve Miller.
Position 93.
Yeah, get into position 93.
And we'll be back with more music. And that's what he wanted, and I figured,
And to
all
set
right.
the tone, this is also during 10Q going crazy and KFI going top 40.
Yeah, this
So-
is 1978, basically. Calendar year 78. Is that
Yeah.
So not
remember?
only
Well, I
was
know
the
that a
competition
year-
FM, but the pop
Well,
competition
you're right,
was still
because
in
I
AM.
went in 77, and then 70, I spent a year with John Sebastian. And then out of nowhere, John took it from Michael Spears blowing it from a 4. He brought it down to a 3, then to a 2.4. When I took it over, it was a 1.6.
And to this day, he insists that he had some of the highest ratings of KHJ.
Yeah,
Not sure what he's looking at.
The highest that went into the bathroom, sure, that were flushed. So, it went down to the all-time low. And I'll tell you how this all came about. Out of nowhere, Paul Drew called me. He's out of RKO. Yeah. He's not president anymore. He called me at home, and he said, Chuck, how you doing? I said, Paul. He says, listen, he says, I got to ask you a question. He said, how do you feel about KHJ? I said, Paul. I said, it's a joke. I said, I'm here because it's a job. My kids are in school. My wife and I, we bought a home. I said, to be honest with you, Paul, I think that this is probably going to be it for me. This is going to be my last hurrah. He says, well, let me ask you a question. He said, what would you think about programming KHJ? What, like I've been doing? He said, no. I mean, actually program director at KHJ. He said, I said, why are you asking? He said, a number of reasons. He said, one is, he says, the ratings are so low that he said it's almost going to be a suicide mission for any program director that goes in. It's a suicide mission. He said, and with the legend of the call letters, he said, that's probably going to follow you if nothing becomes material in there. And he says, I'm going to tell you why I'm asking. He said, I got a call from Dwight Case. And he said, understand, I've got nothing to do with RKO. Mm-hmm. But Dwight called me and he said, what do you think we should do with KHJ? He said, it's the handwriting's on the wall. He said, we're ready to close the door here. He says, he said, I told you guys 2 years ago, he says, about what I was going to do with it. He said, the guy who can turn it around is right there. He said, whether he wants the job at this point is another matter. He said, but the guy's still there, and why he didn't leave is beyond me. He said, but he's still there. Yeah. If you want him, he said, And he says, well, why don't you give him a call to find out? Paul told me this later. He says, he called me to feel me out as to what I thought. And I thought for a couple of minutes, and, I said, I'm going to go out anyway. I don't think that I'm going to be U-Haul trucking around and whatever. So it's a pretty good bet that what have I got to lose? So I called Paul. I said, I would consider it. I didn't tell him I would take it. I said I would consider it because seeing how KHJ was being run, I didn't know if they would have any constraints as to how they were operating
Right.
at that. I've been enough.
Would you have the power to do what you
There
want?
you go, Richard. Yeah. You hit it right on the head. I've been through so many radio stations that say one thing when they want you, and then when you perform, everything that you talked about, increments in ratings increase and promotion dollars and autonomy, etc. I've seen that go by. So I wasn't going to play this game at KHJ. So I said I would consider it. Next thing I know, I get a call from Tim Sullivan who says, Dwight Case wants to see you at corporate headquarters. So here I go to corporate headquarters. Tim's there. I'm there. And it was Harvey Mednick. No, Harvey wasn't in the room. It was just Dwight Case. And so he says, I've talked with Paul, and, we didn't know everything that he was doing. We knew that you were here, but we didn't know in what capacity and so forth. He said, but, he said, we got to do something here. He says, we're talking confidentially. He says, point blank, do you think you could do something with KHJ? I said, I got to tell you, I said, you picked a hell of a time to think about making a change here. I said, the lid is ready to close on the coffin. I said, but, you do have a reputation in this town, and it's a big town. There's a lot of ratings here, and they can be split a lot of different ways. Just because you're low doesn't mean you can't niche out something. I said, in the right circumstances, I think I could do it. But I said, he said, well, what will it take? I said, well, right now, talking here among us, I said, it's going to be a twofold thing. I said, one, I could make a presentation of where I feel the flaws are and where this station has been screwed around for so long and what it's going to take to make a change format-wise and the reasons why the format would be the way it would be. Right. I said, secondly, if you agree upon the format, then there's other things that we have to take care of internally. I said, and that, we'll save that. He said, okay. He said, well, let's start at the first one. Make a presentation. How long will it take? I said, well, why don't you give me 3 days? I go home, and, man, I'll tell you, I started doing my research. I mean, I knew quite a bit about the market after being here for so long that, I kind of looked into it, and I drew it down on pencil. I had it in 48 hours. I had graphs done. I went to a printer. I had the whole thing done. And everything, even rented an easel. Yeah. I went to Tim. I said, I'm ready. I don't need 72 hours. I'm ready. Dwight said, I'll be ready this afternoon. He said, this is a priority with us at RKO. So we go to this nice restaurant in Hollywood. I put up my easel. I got my things. I got the drape over the thing. And we had a congenial lunch. And here I go into the thing. And I pointed out point blank what was wrong. I said, you've got a station that exactly what is happening in the world of music and with young people today is exactly what they don't like about KHJ. Mm-hmm. You've got this explosion of AOR-oriented stations across the country. KMET, KLOS, even K-Rock. They're having a field day. They're coming up, and you're sitting here playing Sean Cassidy, backed up by the 1910 Fruit Gum Company, and every now and then you'll throw in Mel Torme and Barbara Streisand.
And Debbie Boone.
I said, this is what's got to change. I said, it's the sound of the radio station. I said, plus, the biggest thing is for the last year, you've had this John Sebastian experimental format, the redundancy factor of 50 songs over and over, Kashmir, An Afternoon Drive by Led Zeppelin. I said, that's not going to fly. I said, you need what KHJ, in order to bring KHJ back, it's got to sound like KHJ was, only updated to modern times. I said, and that's the first and foremost thing. And I told him, I said, there's no reflection of this market. Well, you listen to KHJ. I said any program director worth its salt could tell you it's not a reflection of what the city is. This city is highly ethnic.
Yes.
It is highly. You're trying to get in there with the KMET dope smoking people on the outside of the perimeter. It's not the mainstream radio. Top 40 radio to be AM now. You're going to have to go 12 plus. But you don't concentrate on 12 to 24. You concentrate 24 to 49. I said, whatever comes in on the upper end. Well, I could see that Dwight Case, not so much Tim Sullivan, but I could see Dwight Case was zoning in on exactly the type of rate because he was very involved with the sales nationally, national sales. So he bought into it. He said, okay. He said, what would be the second part of what we're going to do here? I said, internally, that station's got to be run in the programming department. I said, I don't care about anything else. I said, engineering can take care of itself. You got the best engineer of all. Mm-hmm. And I said, but programming and the news department, that's got to be a whole different ballgame. You've got to keep your nose the hell out of there. You can't even come down on the programming floor. Stay the hell up on the second floor. I said, don't bother me. I said, I need a promotion budget. I need money. I got to make changes. I got to make big changes. I got to fire half the staff that we have here. And I said, and I've got to expand in other departments like research and a music library and PSAs. I said, everything's got to be restructured. I said, even to public affairs. I said, there's nothing being done in the public file as far as going out and ascertain. There's no programming being put on the air to get the problems of the community and having program that has something to do with solving the problem of the community. Why that was a big thing with me. I was a program director in Portland, Oregon to KISN, which is part of the Star chain. Mm-hmm. Don Burden, who was between Don Burden and Gordon McClendon, those are the two guys who started Top 40 Radio in 1955. The two of them are noted for being the pioneers. Don Burden, who with money from his wife, who was the heir to the Swanson frozen food fortune, bought radio stations. He built this empire. And so he lost. He was the first one to lose a radio station. He lost his whole chain because he didn't play with the public affairs and so forth. So I was so in tune with, if you're going to put public affairs and public service on the radio, you're taking up time, precious time.
Plus, RKO had serious license problems going on.
at the time, even then they didn't get to the fever pitch yet, but I knew it was coming, and so that was one of the things that was on my mind. But the main thing, if you're going to, instead of saying, and there will be an egg contest at so and so for the benefit of the fire department in Pico Rivera. Who cares?
Yeah.
I wanted things on about free health clinic because, there was a lot of venereal disease going around in L.A. at the time. But I did free clinics and what time they operate, and this was free, where you could get help with all types of things for the community, not only for yourself. So that was one of the things that I said that, I have to have people for that. I got an assistant to Vivian Porter and stuff. So they went along with that. They said, okay. They said, okay. So, make a long story short, Tim Sullivan stuck his nose in a little bit, but I let him know right on the bat that you get the hell out of here. Yeah. I'm not. I answer to Dwight Case in corporate. I don't answer locally. So it happened that they said, okay, I got the job. And I could remember coming home that night, and we were celebrating and with the guys that I said, I'm going to be the new PD. I said, tomorrow at noontime, I'm walking in. I said that to Rick Jagger. Him and I were like that.
Yes, I know you guys are tight.
We were tight. I said, hey, buddy, I got the job. Well, we came in, we celebrated. So I come home, and I said to Diane, my wife, Well, you're never going to guess what. I said, I'm the program director as of noontime tomorrow on that legendary station, KHJ.
Where the J is resolved.
I said, what now? I said, now I've got to put this all into work. And that J resolved part is that Michael Spears would tell me, because I would do some promos. I would assist Bobby in some promos. Bobby was the head guy, but I would do some promos. And Michael would say, and I would say, on 93 KHJ. No, Chuck, you have to remember, the J is resolved. You have to say KHJ. The J is resolved. It's resolved, all right. Well, anyway, I made my changes in there, and I, the formatics of it, Richard, and I can remember you and I had this talk about 3 years ago at the memorial for Charlie Tuna. It's the first time, you've written such great stuff about me in your articles in the paper. I mean, you really knew what you were talking about when you wrote about KHJ.
You are, because I'm such a radio fan, and KHJ type of radio in particular, and very few people, in my opinion, get it right, and you're the guy who gets it right. So that's why I've tried to hype you more, because I don't think you get enough credit for everything you've done.
I second that.
Gentlemen.
I mean, this guy could program a station right now. I think he could take KHJ away from the Catholics right now and actually bring in ratings.
Except the signal went to hell.
I know, but even so, even with that.
Well, I want to tell you about the signal. You're right. The signal went to hell. It never was a great signal to begin with, but it was the best that it could be, and it covered the whole market in L.A. But here we are at our home. We have another home in Palm Springs. And at one night, I'm out on my patio in the backyard, and I'm DXing on the radio, going around the dial. And I hear, I'm not even looking at the dial because it's already dark. It's at night. Yeah. And I'm going around the dial, and I hear 93 KHJ, Los Angeles. I'm saying, wait a minute. Wait a minute. And I'm in Palm Springs, and I know from L.A. I'm lucky I got him in Diamond Bar at night when the signal cut down. Well, actually, I had to wait for the next ID, a whole hour, and it was the Catholic radio down there on KHJ. And I said, I can't believe it. KHJ in Palm Springs. I couldn't hear it 30 years ago in my home. And there, well, anyway, I digress. But, to talk, here it is, it's 35 years later, if not more. And, it's such a great time, and it's hard for a program director or a disc jockey with great success to talk about themselves. But, it is so many years later, and we don't have a whole lot more time to talk about this while we're still here to be able to talk about it. So I'm going to say that I'm flattered. I'm flattered at everything that's happened to me at KHJ and the great things that are said about me in these radio sites. But on the other hand, you can't get away from the fact that it was a magic time. It was a magic time, and I say that from this perspective. And I've said it before, and I'll touch on it again. Every radio personality, every program director, every music director, every production director around this country from 1965 on wanted to work at one radio station in America, and that was 93 KHJ. Yeah. And to take it over at a time when it was ready to flush down the toilet, and I took it over and had immense success, beyond anybody's expectations, beyond anyone's wildest dream, that this happened at a time when, sure, I was at the head of it, and it was the reflection of my programming ability that I've learned throughout the years and learned from great people, great disc jockeys, great consultants. Paul Drew was, Bill Hennis. I've learned more from big people in radio before I ever got to be my first programming radio station. But more importantly, folks, it was the people that I've surrounded myself with. It was my idea, my format, but it couldn't have been executed if I didn't have the good people behind me to every single step of the way, because I was a stickler on nuances. I wanted the least little detail. That's something I learned from Paul Drew. Don't expound on the flaws, but expand upon your good stuff. It was guys like this guy sitting right here who helped with the sound. Promotion was one of the biggest things. There wasn't a day, there wasn't an hour that went by on KHJ that some promo that he had his hand in, there wasn't one day that there wasn't a promotion on the air. If I didn't have a promotion, we'd create one.
Yeah.
One of them that comes to mind is our magazine, KHJ magazine.
Oh, yeah.
The disc jockeys and what times they were on and what we were going to have and pre-promotion for Motown weekends and this, that, and the other thing and so forth. But it's the disc jockeys, it was the news people who executed exactly what I wanted.
Well, that's what makes a good leader.
Oh.
Take us through some of that. You take over. I imagine that the reaction from the DJs when you told them, "Hey, have some fun now."
Oh God,
it must have been phenomenal. Did they? What was their response right away?
Richard, from the first day I went in and had that meeting that afternoon, and I told the guys to lighten up, get some energy, talk. No more of this 93 can. Talk, say something, do what you want to do. I could tell driving home that excitement on the air. I could just hear it. Now, when we had our first staff meeting, and I'm telling the guys, I always had staff meetings, and I think Douglas could probably expound on that too. It was, in other radio stations where I wasn't a PD and you went in for a staff meeting, it was an ash-chewing session. It was them telling you what you didn't want and how management is this, that. I mean, it was, you went out of there, it was almost like coming out of a morgue. When you came out of my staff meetings, you were energized. And I knew that because in the round table, when I was telling somebody what the contest was going to be, or a promotion that we were doing, or what we were doing, a format change, or this and that, everybody was having a good time. We would laugh and joke. It was camaraderie. It was a team. It wasn't, people came to work even when they weren't time to work, just to see what they could do. And I'm not lying about that. It was a time when smiles were on faces. When I came to KHA, I had all 2 years of seeing the depression and the back talk and the cliques that were going on and just depressed. When I was there, everybody was kicking up their heels. There were smiles on faces.
Well, listen to the energy from this guy, Richard.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, I can imagine it.
You can't be in a room with this guy without feeling elevated, right? I mean, there was always this kind of bouncing off the walls kind of thing, right? That was Chuck's style. Always the big smile, always the energy, and let's go do it.
And it showed on the air.
Oh, absolutely.
If you listen to some of the air checks of that era, and unfortunately there's not a lot out there, but one of the great ones is Charlie Fox. I'm glad you brought him up earlier. To me, he exudes what you wanted with KHJ at the time.
Oh, boy.
From the way he said the call letters to the way he brought in, bigger than life. We're in Hollywood. Let's make a big deal about being in Hollywood.
Yeah.
It's just phenomenal, just magical on the air.
Yeah, and I know I said that, but you said Charlie Fox, that he exuded exactly what KHJ was, and when his last break there, when he said, Los Angeles, I love you, I'll never forget you. This has been the dream of life. And let me just say it one more. KHJ. Just to have him say that, you knew that you were in something that was bigger than life.
Yeah.
We always knew what KHJ was. Those of us in radio, I mean, they don't come any bigger. They don't come any bolder. There's nothing more of a legend than what KHJ was about. But I have to say, along those lines, to be in radio, knowing that radio was the career. I went to college and I got out. I have a broadcast degree, and I always knew that radio broadcasting. Well, I started in the Navy, believe it or not. When I was in the Navy, yeah, that's how my broadcast career started. I was, I joined the Navy out of high school, and I'm going to serve my country. It was Vietnam. And then when I got to Vietnam, I knew, what the hell did I get into? And it's funny how I got there, because I started, when I first got aboard ship, an aircraft carrier, another legendary aircraft carrier, which is the USS Intrepid. It's a museum in New York Harbor and stuff. And anyway, I was in the deck division, and my first port of call was Barcelona, Spain. And so when this kid getting off the Liberty launch, and I go into a bar, and boy, I'm going to drink. I'm in a bar because there's no age limit in Spain. And so I'm there, and there's a chief petty officer from my ship, because we all had the things on the sleeve, USS Intrepid. And I sat down, I'm having a beer, and this drunk petty officer says, how do you like this Navy, young man? I said, you want me to tell you? I said, I think it sucks. And I says, man, I said, I didn't come into Navy to clean toilets and chip paint and this and that. He said, listen, you get me back to the ship tonight, and I might have a job for you. I said, yeah, okay. I thought he was just drunk. Anyway, he bought me a few drinks, and I'm half in the bag. He's real loaded. We get the last Liberty launch back to the ship, 10 o'clock at night. He's staggering. He's holding on to me. I get him on the Liberty launch. I get him up the deck, and I get him in. I bring him to his compartment. I never thought I'd hear anything more about it. It was just one of those things. Well, the next day, my chief says that Chief Hensley wants to see you up at the post office. Well, he was in ship service. And in ship service, they do the laundry, the ship store, the post office, the barber shop, all that kind of stuff. So he says, I'll make a long story short, he brought me to a few other things of laundry. I said, nah, I'd rather chip paint. At least I'm out in the open. But he brings me into the barber shop, and he said, how would you like to? I said, I don't know how to cut hair. He said, we're going to teach you. I said, yeah, I'll do it. So out of the deck division, I'm in the barber shop. What a great job. I'm cutting hair and stuff, and that's how I served in Vietnam. Anyway, I used to cut the public information officer's hair. And about 6 months into it, he says, one of our disc jockeys on Armed Forces Radio Network, which was controlled from the ship, there was a radio station and the thing. And so he says, why don't you you'd be great for that job. Why don't you do that? I said, I don't know how to be a disc jockey. So you didn't know how to cut hair either. So how could you argue with that logic? So he said, come on in 6 o'clock. Here's where the radio station is. And we went in there and, would play not only in the ship, in the barber shop, you had two channels. Channel 1 was beautiful music. 2 was rock and roll. Mm-hmm. And so I went in there. He showed me, here's your turntable. It only had one turntable, no cart machine, and papers this about here, talk in between. And get a name for yourself. Well, I became the Mad Barber. Yeah. That was my thing. I was the Mad Barber. And so 6 o'clock came, and hi, I'm the Mad Barber on W. Well, it was more like, hi, I'm the Mad Barber, and stuff. And we have a new shipment of T-shirts down at ship store number 1, and you can get them for the price of 55 cents. We're at a shortage of water, so be sure you conserve water. Talking to PSA in between the records. And you talk while you're taking this record off. Here, putting another one on and over there. Well, I liked it. I got off the air that night, and I said, wow, are you kidding? Gee, this is fantastic. So the rest of the time I was still a barber, but I had my radio program at night, The Mad Barber, and so forth. So when and at that time, if you were doing your what your job, they called it a billet, whatever your billet was, they would pay to have you go to college. So when I got out, I said, geez, I want to be I want to be a disc jockey.
I want to sell those 55-cent T-shirts.
I want to sell the 55 for real. So I got accepted, and believe it or not, into Columbia. So I went to Columbia, and boy, they don't do that anymore because the GI Bill, it was under the GI Bill. It ain't what it used to be.
Right.
Back when I was, they paid for my whole education, so I loved it. So that's how I started in radio. But then when I got my degree, and I was still cutting hair part-time to go to college, and I had an air check from the college radio station. We'd go around all these places in Connecticut looking for a job. Well, Waterbury, Connecticut is one of the lowest rated markets you're going to find on the East Coast. And I went there. It was owned by Merv Griffin, and the manager hired me. And my first job in radio was doing the tapes at night, WWCO Waterbury. I'd run the tapes from midnight to 6 a.m., and my job every half hour. Back then you had to give every half hour and take the meter readings with the thing. This is WWCO in Waterbury. Now Dolly Holiday. And I'd press the button. Yeah. Automation would come on, and Dolly Holiday. Hi, this is Lester Lannon with Glenn Miller and his orchestra on music for Holiday Inn's nighttime. Remember, there's free ice at every Holiday Inn. Blah, blah, blah. And also Mike and I were talking. That's where I ran into Damien, who was Harris T. Bragdon. Buddy Bragdon was his name on the air.
Damien at KLOS.
Damien at KLOS.
You remember Damien?
That's funny.
Yeah, I would love to hear an air check of Damien doing Top 40 radio.
Yeah,
because
sure.
he was that guy that you were trying to get rid of at KHJ with the...
Yeah. So, anyway, him and I worked together there and everything. And so... I started there and, a bunch of smaller stations. I went to Fitchburg, Massachusetts, Manchester, New Hampshire. Then I got a big break at WDRC in Hartford. WDRC in Hartford was a station where, you had an engineer behind the glass. It was like the old days at KHJ, and you didn't touch anything as a radio announcer. You didn't even have a mic switch. You would go like this to them, and when you wanted it closed, you'd go to him, and he'd take care of everything. Give me commercial 422. That was a dream job because we had a field trip when I was in college radio, and we would go to the radio station. I mean, to go into into DRC with all that glass and engineers. Oh, it was a dream. I can remember there was, where do you want to be when you end up in your radio career in college? I said, I want to be at DRC in Hartford. If I could end my career at DRC in Hartford. Well, I made it to DRC in
18,
a year and a half, 18 months. I made it to DRC.
Wow.
So my guys from college radio who I was with, they would call me and they'd say, hey, how are you? What are you? Where are you going now? DRC. You said that's where you wanted to be. End up your career. What do you want now?
That's it.
I said, well, now. I said, if I can do anything, I'm gonna get to KHJ in Los Angeles. I got to KHJ in 10 years.
Wow.
And so and we're and I was very fortunate to work at some pretty good stations back there. WAVZ, WNHC, which was owned by Triangle Publications. That's where I got the name Chuck Martin. Before that, I was Terry Woods, and I think I was talking to Mike about that.
Yeah, tell that story.
I'll tell that story. So here I am, and I'll just preface it with one you don't know. Okay. TRY, the market is Troy, Albany, which is a big town in New York. It's like Anaheim, Los Angeles, big. Okay.
Right.
So anyway, I get the job at TRY in Troy, New York, and they warned me about the money was good, so I said I'll go up there. And so the manager, they said, he gets drunk. You got to watch him. He'll call you. He'll drive you nuts. Well, I'm there a couple of days, and we're doing the Great 98, $1 million weekend. And okay, Terry Woods on $1 million weekend on the Great 98. The hotline goes off. I pick it up, and it's the general manager, the one that they said is an idiot. Be careful, he'll drive you. And he doesn't even remember the next day. You will never say that on my radio. What did I say? You know what you said. All I said was $1 million weekend on the Great 98. And he, blah, 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 blah. And he ran me up one side and down the other. And I said, this is BS. So
probably went to the Ron Jacobs School of Management.
I get an air check because I was air checking every night, and I bring the air check across the street to PTR in Albany, New York. 50,000 watts, big station. You could hear them to Newfoundland, all of New England. She used to listen. She was about 250 miles away, and she could still hear me clear as a bell.
Wow.
So I go over there, and I said, I just started at TRY. I'm a disc jockey over there. And he said, he says, we know you came to town. He said, we heard you. He said, but, you might be in the right place at the right time because we want to get rid of this guy. And he says, when can you start? I said, this afternoon? He said, yeah. Can you start that fast? I said, you bet. I go back over to the other station. I remember what the guy said, that he can't really remember what he says when he calls you up. So he says, I said, Mr. Simmers, I said, I got a feeling that it's not going to work out for me here. Albany, it's a big city, and I don't think that I'm really prepared. I'm not, ready for the station. Well, do you really feel? I said, yeah. I said, I can't even go on the air today. I feel so sick. I'm nauseous. I can't. I've been here a few days. I said, and it's just driving me nuts. I said, physically, I can't handle it. I can't even go on the air anymore. He says, and he gets up out of his desk. He comes around, and he pats me on the back. I know. I was a young announcer just like you one time. And I know what it's like. And he says, this is a big market, and it's got to be top-notch pros who come into here. And you need a little more seasoning. I understand. He says, but I'll tell you what. He goes out of his office. He comes back. He's got a check. 6 weeks' pay. 6 weeks' pay. Now, this is such an anomaly in radio because usually they'll throw you out with a Tootsie Bar.
If that.
And he gives me the check for 6 weeks. He said, maybe someday we can work again down the line.
You'd only been there 2 days?
No, I think it was
maybe a week.
maybe a week.
Maybe a week?
Okay. And if we're lying about that, Doug, 2 weeks tops. 2 weeks tops. She didn't even know where I was. So anyway,
I had a friend of his, and he called me, and he says, where is he?
He's not on the air.
I don't know where he is.
So anyway, I leave his office, I go right to the bank.
Get that thing deposited.
I got cash in hand. So, and then I go across the street, I'm ready. I go on the air that afternoon.
Did you change your name at that point?
No, I was still Terry Woods.
Okay,
because the next one is coming right after that. This is the little sweetening I wanted to tell you about because it's a good story how it came about. So I go on the air there, and I'm fine. I call up Diane. Well, your buddy Joe Hager, he can't hear you on the radio, and he called me and stuff and blah, blah, blah. I said, you got a radio, put it on 1510. She gets there, and here I am on there. So I'm there a while. Everything's good. Ratings are good. I did well. They had the ABC jingles. And so I get the pink certificate, the memo, telephone message. Call Bill Hennis at WNHC in New Haven. I said, oh, wow. I call him up, and he says, listen, he said, I've been listening to you up there. And you got to remember, this is like 250 miles away.
Yeah.
I think you were in New Haven. Where were we? Wherever. So, because I came out of one New Haven station.
No, we were outside of Hartford.
Hartford. Okay, yeah, that's right, because I was at DRC in Hartford. Anyway, he says, I've been listening to you up there. He says, we might have a shot for you down here. He said, do you know about us? I said, NHC, yeah. Well, NHC was Boss Radio, modeled after KHJ, but as best that they could do with a station in there and stuff. So I was well aware of him, and I was well aware of Bill Hennis. So he says, I'd like to hire you. He says, you got what it takes. He says, you got the energy we're looking for. He said, but he said, I got one problem. What's that? Your name. What's the problem? Well, Terry Woods. That sounds like a kid. And we're more mature here. We're boss jocks. You got to have a boss jock name to be a boss jock. I said, oh, you have a problem with that? I said, well, no, not really. You have any suggestions? He said, listen to this. And here I am on a 15 KC line on the phone. Chuck Martin, WNHC, New Haven. That was it. That name could have been Harold J. Schwartz.
Or Arthur W. Ferguson.
I would have taken it in a minute, in a New York minute. And that's how Chuck Martin got his name from there. But that little story beforehand, it's a good story, and as, this Art Simmers, that crazy drunk general manager, he's got quite a reputation back east. And a couple of years ago, I got an award 4 years ago for the New England Broadcasters, a Lifetime Achievement Award from the New England Broadcasters Association, because I started my career back there, and I worked a lot of stations in New England. So I got that award, and I was back there, and I told that story about Art Simmers in my acceptance speech. And a lot of guys, they came down and they said, you got back at Art Simmers for every disc jockey, whoever went through his stations. So I've got the moniker of being the guy who got back at Art Simmers for everything he wanted.
Did he ever ask for his severance back?
No, he didn't. But he was the general manager at WMEX in Boston when Charlie Tuna worked there under the name of Melvin X. Melvin.
Yes. Yeah.
Melvin X. Melvin.
Crazy.
So he worked for Art Simmers.
Can we
too.
back up just a touch, because you didn't tell the story about how you got the name Terry Woods.
Oh, yeah. Well, my first day in radio. Well, like I said, my wife and I were going around giving resumes and an air check to all these stations. I got hired at WWCO, and I gave the resume and I gave the tape, and I didn't hear anything for, I don't know, a month. Out of nowhere, in the mailbox one day, she comes a 3 cent, 2 cent, whatever postcards were back then, a 2 cent postcard, and on the back it said, "Contact Wally King at WWCO Waterbury." Didn't even have his number on there. No phone call. My resume had a number on it and everything. This station was so cheap, they didn't even have the. Well, I call him up and he said, I think we might have something for you here. Thank you. You won't regret it. I won't let you down. Well, hold on. You better come and talk to us. You may not like what we have. Why don't you come up here and find out? I said, that's an odd thing to say. It was my first job in radio, but that's a hell of a thing to say. You might not like what we have for you, and on a 2 cent postcard without their phone number on there. Well, I go in there and he says about the Dolly Holiday program that, you're going to change tapes, you're going to give the ID every half hour and take the meter readings. And I said, well, I'll take it. And I think it was $2 an hour, $80 a week, 40 hours a week. And I had to wash the news cruiser and do the teletype overnight. And by the way, folks, my first night in radio was the very night they assassinated Robert Kennedy out here in L.A.
Wow.
That was my first. Talk about a trial by fire. I'm sitting there monitoring and stuff. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning there, and I see buzzers, and there's like a red light in the control room. That was the UP and the AP press. Whenever a bulletin would come through, flashing. What the hell is this? They never told me about that in Columbia, and so I go back to the newswire. Kennedy is dead. And they had the story there. It's coming in little by little. And I figured, well, I'm the guy on the air. I'm not going to call anybody. And I'm ripping and reading. I'd come in. We interrupt the Dolly Holiday. We interrupt the Dolly Holiday. Okay. To this bulletin, Robert Kennedy was shot. More details. Now back to Dolly Holiday. I'd go and read the thing. We interrupt this program and giving them more and stuff. Then Wally King, the general manager, he calls me in a half hour. Somebody must have called him. You're doing a good job. You're great. I'm going to be up there. Well, then the news people came in and everything. My first, thank God, I'm saying to myself, because I'm over there, just beside myself with what the hell do I do now? It was one hell of a night. Well, anyway, when I got my first show, so, little by little, I got to do 5 to 6 in the morning on my own show that he said you could do before the Morning Man came in. So I was the introduction to the Morning Man, Terry Wood Show on WWCO. So then I got nights. In fact, I was 10 to 2. Buddy Bragdon, Damien, was 6 to 10.
But where did the Woods name come from then?
I'm using my real name on the air, and Wally King said the first night, he says, he's dead. When you go on the air tonight, you have a different name, something that's easy for people to remember and put down in the ratings. All right, kid? I said, okay, Mr. King. So you put back then, and Damien was involved in this. He said, this is what we do. You take 2 stacks of 45 records, and you take the first name of one and the last name of another. And I'm going through this and that names, and then I got to Terry Stafford, Suspicion, and Brenton Wood. Give me a little sign. Terry Woods. There it is. I'm Terry Woods. And that's what it was until he it sounds like a kid. And what do you got any suggestions? Yeah. Chuck Martin. So
does this mean that they had a jingle already cut for somebody else with that name, and they just plugged you in?
I told him that. He said, after years later, I said, Bill, how did Chuck Martin come about? He said, well, when we had the Johnny Man do the jingles, he said, we knew that we needed not only the names here, that not only everybody was going to stay, and it was so expensive to have those jingles made.
Oh, just make a bunch extra.
Names. We just picked names, and we had them done. And Chuck Martin, he said, you sounded like a Chuck. When I heard you on the air, he said, I thought that the Chuck Martin one would be good for you.
Wow.
And that's how Chuck Martin came about.
Great story.
And it's stuck ever since,
The magic of radio.
The magic of radio, yeah. Well,
no one knew it was this scientific.
Least of all, Terry Stafford and Brenton Woods.
I know. I got to tell you, it's funny how things have a way of guiding your career, particularly in this crazy business, because it is crazy. That if I didn't have the good fortune to run into Paul Drew, I often wonder where I would have ended up and what my career path would have taken. You could go. I thought of this afterward when after KHJ, I said, why do I want to stay in radio? I'm going to go out at the top station with the top credentials that anybody in radio could ever have. Why do I want to go back down the ladder? And I've seen this happen to so many of my peers, people that I started with radio back east and also all over the country, and how they'll get to whatever position they are, and then they're just a shadow of themselves as they go work down into smaller, medium markets and so forth. And I said that, where do you go from KHJ and the success that I had here? I think that this is the time and the place. But I often thought, after that realization, that where would I have been? Where would my career have taken me? What path if it wasn't for Paul Drew?
How did you meet him, by the way?
Well, I ran into Paul Drew at a station in New Haven, and I was across the street at another station. He hired me. He told the manager of the station to get in touch with this guy. He's given us trouble across the street. He's given us trouble. We need to get him. And he was only a consultant, by the way. And he says, you got to get this guy over here. He said, so let's see what it could do. And they had a consultant then, not only Paul Drew was the big guy, but there was another guy who was big in ARB, Bob Atkinson. He was a big guy from ARB, and he lived in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And he was the one who called me, and he said, I want you to come over here and so forth. And then I was a jock there for a while, and Atkins came to me, and he said, Paul Drew wants to meet you. Well, I heard a lot from the people there and outside the station that Paul Drew, they had a name for Paul Drew. He was the Fuhrer of radio, and he could really light your ass on fire, big time. And he had a reputation that preceded him, and I was kind of scared, to even meet him. But they said he wanted to meet you. He's the reason why you're here. He heard you over there. Yeah. He wants you over here. So I met him, and he says, you got any programming experience? And I said, well, I've got one little station. I said, it didn't last very long. I said, I didn't get along with the GM, and I moved on. And he said, well, what do you think about programming? I said, I like it. I said, it's good. He said, okay. He says, what do you think about programming AVZ? You want to program this station here? I said, well, yeah, but you got a program director. He says, not anymore. So I did, and, and we would have weekly calls. And the music came out of RKO, Dave Sholin, and Christy. I don't know if you remember her, Christy, somebody. She came national out here.
Yeah, no, I don't remember her.
And they would report that. Well, they help with the music, and Paul would tell you, what do you think? I said, yeah, I know, I don't like that. Take it off, he said. I said, okay, what do you want me to put in there? You figure it out. And stuff. So little by little, I figured that, well, this isn't, they're not telling me what to do.
So he saw your potential really early.
Yeah, I guess. He left me alone. Every time I would say, well, what do I replace it with? He said, well, you're the PD. What do you think? So quickly I learned that this was my ball game, and I did that. And then the station had great results. I don't know if I brought that letter. One of the best letters I ever had was from him after that, and he said how proud he was. He's never seen a station take off in a direction. It was in an envelope, so I don't think it's there. So and stuff, and so he then brought me to. That's how I ran into Paul Drew. That's how I started with him. Then I went to a second station, did the same thing there. So brought the station from obscurity up there. But then the third station, this Y103 in Jacksonville, that's what really did it, because I just blew off a legendary major station in Jacksonville, the Big Ape, WAPE, in one book with that 10.4.
And you had not been in the business very, very long at that time, right?
Well, I'd have to say, Richard, I probably was in the business about 7 years, 6 or 7 years by then.
That's not long at all.
Yeah,
how old were you at the time?
Oh, God, I had to be 30.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Very.
Yeah, and And then the second book with the 15.9, I mean, there wasn't really much more to do with that station. I mean, you take the legendary station from a 14 down to a 7, and you go from a 1.9 to a 10.4 in the first book and a 15.4 in the second book. What more is there to do? But and again, that phone call out of nowhere in the middle of the night, hardly, almost, of I don't know. You sit down. I don't know how to tell you this. You're not working there anymore.
I never thought of Drew as being that kind of game player, because everything else was right up front.
You're right. Now I had, Doug, there was some kind of a relationship that I had, and I swear to this day it's because of our stature. We're two small guys. And when you're small, life has a way of sometimes giving you more of the kick in the ass with the broom than someone else. And I think he kind of lived through that same dynamic. And because we talk about this a lot. What did Paul Drew why did other people say they can't stand him? He ripped me up one side and down the other, tore me a new one, and this and that. And him and I got along great. I mean, one of our biggest things, we're sitting with his wife and Paul, her and I, and he's at dinner, having dinner, and he said, I can always tell a Chuck Martin radio station, it has a sound all its own. It has a certain sparkle. Was that the word he used, sparkle?
As a listener, I would agree.
But from a program director, Richard, for a program director and a radio personality to have the biggest guy in radio tell you that is such, that's what I'm trying to say. This story happens to be about me, and I don't like, to put my ego there. But it's 35 years later. There's nothing more I'm doing in radio. I don't need a job tomorrow.
Right.
But after all, this is my story, and these are things that I've lived with and have been on my mind that, the certain things. So, in the hippie days, my wife and I went to Woodstock, by the way.
Wow.
Oh.
In our hippie days, it was when the planets line up, man, and Venus is in line with Mars, and all the signs are in. Well, I got to tell you, there might be a little something to that, because there's something about how everything came about right when I thought it wasn't coming about. I mean, to be a radio personality and get to KHJ is one thing. Mm-hmm. To become program director of KHJ at its most miserable time in history and bring it to the heights that we did during that time is a radio person's dream come true.
You have to expand on that more, because a lot of people don't realize, and this is one of the reasons you don't get the credit you deserve, they were really low. Everyone thinks, they're on their last legs, and that's why they went country. But they don't understand what you did during that time.
Yeah.
The ratings were down low. You brought them up. My understanding is that you had the highest percentage increase that the station ever saw.
You're absolutely right, Richard, and I'm glad you said it and not me, because it is true that that RKO went through a big thing to the agencies, and they were saying that they did all the calculations, and they said, because they get really into it, when you talk about national radio sales for a national chain, particularly a chain like RKO, it's like saying the ABC chain, the NBC chain. It's the big chains and fighting for dollars. And they did. It came up with, it was the highest percentage of increase in the history of KHJ, including the Drake days. But let's call it what it really is. The station was so low, and I brought it to such a height that it was very easy to do that. I mean, the highest percentage of increase, Drake had a change, but he brought it up to number one status, but he brought it within numbers like this to become number one. I brought it from here up to that status, but the highest percentage of increase, my numbers came up higher than Bill Drake, only because look at where they came
when you're
from.
starting at zero.
So, I mean,
but But even there, you still started from has been. What was it, about a 1.4 or something like that?
Well, it was a 1.6,
okay.
and then and so like I say, I say that, and it's a nice feat to have on my repertoire that I had the highest percentage of increase even over the Bill Drake days. Where that's true, you got to put it into perspective.
I know that. But also to keep perspective, this is 1979.
Yeah,
FM was big. You had big stations going against you,
sure.
KFI and 10Q.
Sure.
So do you remember what the numbers were?
I sure do. And not only did I have 10Q and KFI, but I also had KLOS and KMET,
right.
which were also exploding.
Not to mention KISS.
And not to mention KISS.
And
but in 1979, and then here is my first book. This is from Tim Sullivan to the staff and everybody in the RKO network. As I move through the agencies, I'm continually confronted with RKO success stories. But what about KHJ? And I must admit, blah, 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 blah. And I'll cut to the chase here. Quite frankly, if you're the very same people, you take a moment to analyze the latest book as we did, you'd be most surprised. As an example, an increase of 86% in total adults. 86%.
And that's an increase,
now,
so it's almost doubling.
54% in men alone, 18 to 34, 56% in women. But here's the big story. You want the big story? The big story, and this is right from RKO stuff, that Monday through Friday in men 18 to 34, 183% increase. In women, 454% in the same demographic.
Wow.
But let's hold on. In total men 18 to 49, 700%, which is the biggest one. And then we go through men 25 to 34, 313%. And I did say 700%, but on Sunday from 3 in the afternoon to 7, we went up 775%. That's just a small day part. And there's other ones here, 45%, 63%, 136%, 293%, 168%. So the percentages of increase of what we did and from where we were in, that was Led Zeppelin. And we're going to have 4 more in a row after we take this break on position 93.
So you were back in at least the 2s, right? In 12 plus?
No, we were in the 3s.
Yeah, okay, so you're in the 3s.
Yeah.
So what the heck happened? What are these morons in RKO doing, not letting you just keep it going?
Well, I can remember I went in for a meeting with Dwight Case and Dick McGarry, because Tim Sullivan, who was a big thorn in my side, and he left before I had the big one. On my second book was the big one. He left and went to K-Hits, and I got Dick McGarry. But Dick McGarry, he knew not to bother me. And so we had a meeting at corporate with Harvey Mednick, Dwight Case, Dick McGarry, and me, and Dwight Case said, quite frankly, Chuck, what do you think is the outlook for the future of KHJ? And I said, well, Dwight, I got to be honest with you. I mean, we really pulled it out from where it was. the station could survive very nicely on the what were we at 3.1, 3.4, I think a 3.4. Yeah. And I said, we could survive. We're in the top 10. In a station like Los Angeles, where you got 86 signals coming in here in competition, we're in the top 10. With the figures that you have, you could make a hell of a lot of money for the company with just where we are. All we got to do is maintain it. But it's going to take a lot more commitment to keep the promotion, the dollars that we have, because you were running this thing on a shoestring with a bad format, and that's where we are. Right now, everything is right. The format is good. But to sustain it, you've got heavy competition from FM, and we all know now FM is going to be the wave of the future. So he says, well, I kind of hear that what you're saying is that longevity down. I said, well, Dwight, when you say longevity, what are you talking about? He said, well, 7-10 years. I said, 7 to 10 years from now, I said, FM is going to be much bigger than it is right now, and the top 10 status could be top 20 status. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, all right, that gives us a perspective. Next thing I know, within 30 days of that meeting, within 1 month, within 30 days of that meeting, I'm told that Dwight came to me. He said, I want you to hear it from me before anybody else. We've made a corporate decision that we're going to change the format of KHJ. I said, oh, what's it going to be? He said, country. We're going to change it to country because the consultants that we've had brought in here, they say that there's no FM station except one in Orange County at the time, I believe.
Yeah, KORJ, I think it was.
Something like that. It was one FM station, and it wasn't doing very well.
No, and a limited signal for sure.
Yeah, and it wasn't doing very well. He said, but we thought that on AM to bring to L.A. that it would be a format that you can't get anywhere else.
Wasn't KLAC already country?
Yeah, KLAC had been country for a long time.
Had they been? Well, they weren't doing very well.
I can't remember the numbers, but KLAC was definitely a traditional country station in every way.
They didn't get that far down the dial.
Yeah, well, they weren't getting the rating. I didn't know anything about country, and I didn't even, when I looked at the ratings of KLAC, didn't mean anything to me.
Yeah.
So they certainly weren't in the status that we were with the numbers. So I thought that was kind of odd. But he said, do you want to program KHJ as a country station? I said, Dwight, I say, I know absolutely nothing about country. And at that point, if they were going to change the format, knowing the kind of work that we had to do at that radio, we all worked hard. We had fun. Yeah. Believe me, we had fun. We had more fun than should be legal at that radio station. But we also worked hard, and I wasn't about to take a format that I knew nothing about. It was strange territory for me, and I certainly didn't want to be the guy who brought KHJ back to prominence and then
took it down.
take them down on country. I said I said no. So that's when they brought in. I said I'll wait till you bring in whoever you want to bring in.
I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that you being truthful is actually what ended up doing the station in.
Yeah. Well, I was
because
truthful.
I still think they would have had a few years, and I still think it could have built up. I really think that AM died. A lot of its a lot of the problems were brought on by programmers pushing people to FM.
Yeah, I agree with you, Richard.
Had
I really
KHJ
do.
not gone through the '70s era, in fact, outside of a few programmers, particularly the ones you've referred to, that really pushed people away.
Well, yeah. When you say that, Richard, just think of the immense part of what you say. When you take a look at John Sebastian trying to do FM on AM radio at a time where FM is exploding,
and it's hip,
and it's hip. And you're trying to do that on AM radio. You're pushing. You're just you're taking whatever audience you have and saying, Go over there. Go listen to them.
And a major flaw was that he was assuming it was just the music, which it wasn't. KMET didn't do well because of the music. They did well because of the whole attitude.
Yeah, sure. The upside-down billboards and hoo-yah and all that kind of stuff that was going on during that time.
It always occurred to me that I thought that when it comes to the long-term fate of what AM 930 was going to be under whatever call letters or format would be that they knew that the demographic skew was going to keep older adults on the AM band, but the kids are going to be gone. Right. And so they were figuring that country, having an older demographic appeal, would be a place to go. And not only we are in the middle of the urban cowboy country crossover phase, get lots of press and lots of visibility.
And it was the time of urban cowboy.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah, the movie was big. Everything was big. I mean, everybody wanted to go to Gilly's place in Houston, Texas, right? Yeah. So so there was that in the pop culture thing, but I always thought that they figured that the FM audience is going to attract the younger, and they might be able to keep the older demographic where country is more comfortable.
Well, you're right in what you say, Doug, and more so, too, because I can remember when I said to Dwight, when he said, tell me what the future of KHA, I said, look at KRLA, who's been a prominent contender for a lot of years. They're one of the early pioneers of rock radio in L.A., and they have managed to bring out for themselves where they could stay on the air with their oldies, older format, particularly with the ethnic base that we had. And getting into that, and I told him, I said, worst come to worst, you could be that inner city, East L.A. influenced, Latino-based radio station in L.A. with the old, doing the same thing KRLA did, but only do it much better. Yeah. And that went right over their head. And of course, at the time, I got to admit that I didn't really care about making another monster KRLA radio in the guise of KHJ. No. But I think about it now, it certainly could. KHJ could be on the air right now today and getting into that KRLA audience that there was.
It just seems so bizarre that you take a station that was on an upward trajectory and then do that. Yeah. And not stick you on K-Earth. Yeah.
Well, that wasn't even proposed to me. And I thought about it later, Richard, and I said, why wouldn't they? I mean, K-Earth has been sustaining. It was doing nothing. It was just staying there. Why wouldn't they give me the FM? I could have done a heck of a thing with K-Earth, but they didn't.
K-Earth was always one of the top billing stations, one or two in the nation.
Sure,
for
because
years.
of their older demo, of the older demo, oldies.
Exactly. And what you were talking about. Automated format.
Exactly.
Older demos, sure. And they could have made a fortune. But, about the format on KHA, and I can remember you and I talked about this at Charlie's Memorial, that removing ego here, although there's ego all over this table here. Man, it's spilling here. But, I could take a radio station today with the same formatics under the same type of strategy I used musically and ethnically. And as far as I'm concerned with what's going on in L.A. radio, there's not a doubt in my mind that I could pull it off again using the same format, format. But here's why. I'm not just making a blanket statement to stroke my ego. I'm now going to tell you why. What I did at KHJ was analyze the market. It's what nobody did from Bill Drake days. From Bill Drake being involved and then Drew coming in, even Drew was part of that old line top 40 bubblegum radio, hit radio, and allowing the Sean Cassidy and Leif Garrett and 1910 Fruit Gum Company and I Think I Love You, all that kind of stuff. He allowed that, and he missed what the market was about. I think Drew was kind of on the wane himself. Nobody analyzed the market, Richard. Nobody analyzed the market for what it was. And John Leader said it best, that I had the good fortune for 18 months to know the market. John Leader wrote about it. And
and you brought it. I know it's not your favorite station that you ever worked at, but when you went to K-West and took the station top 40, and you brought in Benny Martinez, for evening times. He was the first that I ever heard, kind of the bilingual DJ.
Yep.
Which I think, again, shows you knew the audience.
Absolutely.
And it seems to me that was a case where they were just impatient with the results.
Well, that's a different story at K West. I could wrap that one up in a nutshell, because that one there was, they could have really been something. K West really could have done KHJ on FM if they listened to me. But then again, that was a whole situation, and I'll touch on that. But I want to finish up on analyzing the market for the format at KHJ. In 30 seconds. I knew where the books were. Nobody analyzed the books.
Yes.
I went to Beltsville, Maryland, and I paid for the session to bring out where the diaries went out. And I'm not the only one who did it. Other big program directors have done it also. I wanted to see exactly where the diary placements were. And I looked and I looked and I saw where the majority of them went, into the metropolitan area of Los Angeles proper. And I'm saying, with that in mind, with the ratings from the oldies that KRLA is doing on oldies radio with that schlocky, old-time doo-wop rock and roll, why in the hell are they doing 1910 Fruit Gum Company and Sean Cassidy? This doesn't make sense. And then with K-Day having the other thing that there were diaries going into Inglewood and Compton and all those other areas, the brown and the black audience, I revamped the music from head to toe. I drove this guy here crazy because we went from 50 records over and over, and I don't know what the hell we had, 300, whatever, but I did it in day parts, where in day parts I knew the older audience. This was another thing. They didn't day part. Cashmere at 4 o'clock in the afternoon drive home. I day parted. I had housewives, and I brought in that old doo-wop music on the oldie part. I softened up some of the midday stuff, but it was still energetic. It was always alive when it came in. And in the afternoon and nights, it was that type of a format with the music and the pre-programming segues and stagers that came into what we were doing. Time Machine and so forth.
Machine.
The Time Machine.
It's right there. You can play it for you. Why'd you plug that in? It's a great track.
KHJ Time Machine.
From 1967, here's the Spencer Davis Group on KHJ. Boom. So, I mean, those, no matter where you were and no matter what day part it was for whoever was available to listen at that time.
Well, see,
and that's one of the big things that program directors past at KHJ and other stations failed to realize. And that's why KHJ exploded, because it came back to what it was, but only 20 years later in the time period in which we were.
Well, see, the L.A. has always been a very diverse place. You know, I mean, progressive and ethnically and diverse in every way. And I don't think most people coming from outside get that at all. I mean, it's like we invented diversity. Southern California, before anybody knew the word and what it meant, but you were tapping into that diversity.
Well, if you remember, we're playing the Dells, Oh What a Night, for an oldies, to the Knack. My Sharona, Romantics, In Your Sleep.
Yeah, that's right. Sure.
And stuff. So we had, but we knew where to play it. We knew exactly where these things were to be plugged in.
I always looked. I always was amazed by your knack for picking the right R&B records. Right? I mean, you really had a good ear for that, because there was a lot of things that were high on the R&B charts that weren't that hot on the pop charts, right? Yeah. But you were very selective about picking the right ones that had that great balance, that brought the rhythmic thing in there without being exceedingly soul, you know, but it had a pop sensibility. So you and Sean McNamara and whoever else had their ears on it were really good at picking those songs.
You know, it's funny you say that because you remember that tape you made with all when I was leaving and everybody came in and you produced it.
Oh, sure, yeah, the Goodbye to the Chucker.
Goodbye to the Chucker and all these things. Well, at another radio station, there was another one where they all came in, and it was prefaced by Chuck Martin. As we say goodbye to Chuck Martin was always wanted to be a black program director, but there was just one problem. Chuck Martin isn't black. But
neither was Bill Clinton.
Well, you know, and I also had the good fortune of being back east. Now, back east is a kind of a lot like in metropolitan areas like Los Angeles, because New Haven was probably 70% black, and I did the same thing there, and I had a balancing thing to get white music into black music and so forth. So there was an awful lot like it, too, but L.A. is a market unto itself. There wasn't so much of the heavy Latino, and there you have to have the rhythm. It was, it's the sound. People say, well, how did you do it? I mean, records are records. Anybody could have played the same records that you do. It has to be. Remember how Hurricane, and Hurricane was with me at 4 radio stations.
Yes, I know he had a long history with you.
He knew exactly what I wanted and how I wanted it, and the record, how they would follow. And when somebody broke the format, I could tell just because I could be in the car. I didn't need the list in front of me. I could tell by the sound of the record, and I would call up and say, what was the record? Oh, I made a mistake. Yeah, the bullshit you did. You wanted to hear this record. You put it before that record. But it was the rhythm of how everything went along. And if you remember the jingle package.
The rhythm of Southern California. 93 KHJ.
By chance, did you give him a copy of the bed, the 60-second bed?
I have the produced version with the actualities on it.
Yes.
It's on there. The one called Promo in all caps.
I love Southern California. I'm from Michigan, and it's an entirely different world.
Everything is here in Southern California.
Can't you feel a rhythm, rhythm? Put it to me, rhythm, rhythm. Can't you feel a rhythm, rhythm? Rhythm of the Southland.
Well, there's no other place to live.
The rhythm of LA sunshine. Can't you feel the rhythm of the Southland? 93 KHJ.
It's amazing, and the beaches. It's just the entire ambiance.
Rhythm of the Southland. The rhythm of LA sunshine. Can't you feel the rhythm of the Southland? 93 KHJ.
Now, the thing is look at how dynamic that is. It's almost like when that came on the radio. I defy you to turn it all. I defy you to try to change that station. But that's the genius of this guy right here. I mean, that was a bed. And those beds go on, and he had to put all these things, because I would have somebody go out on the street, ask them, go to the beach, go to Hollywood, go to L.A., go wherever, and ask people, tell me about what you like about Southern California. Yeah. Now, that's coming right into the community. That's hitting people right where they live. And you take an exciting bed like that, and you put that under there, and then follow it up with an up-tempo record.
Yeah.
And one of their disc jockeys who they're listening to all the time, and they hear that, and there's more things in there. Well, even that one that Mike had the beginning with Paul Friesen there, the rhythm. Do you have that first one you have again?
The running ID.
The rhythm of Southern California.
93 KHJ.
Los Angeles.
I mean, when you hear stuff like that,
Still gives me chills.
I know, and I got to tell you, it's 40 years later, and I got goosebumps. But it's the rhythm; it's a feeling, and that was the success behind KHJ. That total sound. Sure, I engineered the sound, but it was people who made it work. I wasn't on the air at that time. I was just a off-the-air program director. I just went on the air when I had to let a few people go. Which,
That happens.
Yeah, that did happen a few times, and it was at the drug explosion, and I certainly had my cross to bear with some of my people going off the deep end and stuff.
Well, I mean,
and I had to make a few corrections, and that hurt.
So you had Mucho Morales, Banana Joe.
Yeah.
And who was the rest of the Ocean, obviously?
I had Bobby Ocean. I had Rick Dees, Bobby Ocean. I had Pat Garrett. I had Banana Joe. I had, at night, I had Tony Maddox. And then I went with, oh, boy. Oh, wow.
Long time ago.
Wow. G. Winnikers. I don't know. My brain. Well, I've been there for the years, and I went through personnel changes. I mean, I inherited the True Don Blue, who I didn't want, and that came in with Sebastian. I didn't want, and he made a thing and a thing. I fired him, and I was nice about it. I just said, you don't meet the sound that I'm looking for, and he said. Somebody wrote something about me in one of the radio sites, and he said, someone said something nice, and he came in on a reply, and he said, yeah, I remember when the chucker had to stand on a chair to fire me. And then I had another guy who wrote in and said, Chuck Martins doesn't have to stand on any chair to meet anybody eye to eye. And so, it was the same guy. And since we're talking about this, I think I might have something oh, no, it's in here. The same guy who retorted to that, he...
This is on a contemporary blog? I mean, something that's happening recently?
No, it was something about somebody was writing about how proud they were to be part of my radio station in New Haven at WABC, consulted by Paul Drew and so forth, and Chuck Martin helped me so much. And the same guy, Pete Salon, he's the one who wrote in over the True Don Blue and said, Chuck Martin doesn't have to stand on any chair to see eye. And so Pete said, I had so much fun then at working for Chuck at AVC, and no one was a better coach than Chuck Martin. He taught us the old school work ethic and stuck with it. His intense coaching sessions would frequently pay off with some amazing fun, like a field trip to barge in on an unsuspecting night jock at a competing station. My well-known friend Bob Rivers, who was just nominated to the Hall of Fame, will remember piling into Chuck's car high over the hills and as high as we were, going into either Waterbury or Hartford, playing air checks of KHJ and the real Don Steele on the car stereo. And little did we know that our mentor would land there as PD just 2 years later.
Wow.
And so
cool.
that reminded
Very cool.
Yeah. So, and stuff like that. Those increase in numbers, I can't even begin to tell you guys. I mean, we all are radio roots. We're all in radio roots, and we may do different things. But, we're all connected. There's something that brings us all together. There's a connection we all have. Because there's a line that I've used for many, many years with my guys, and people still quote this today, that I say broadcasting is the challenge and the reward. Before you go onto a microphone and you put that switch on, you better believe that you are king of the mountain. You're going to command people to listen to you. You're going to command people that when you open that microphone, you're going to say something. Damn it, you better make it count. You better rap and not crap. And the challenge is to meet going on the radio and grabbing people's attention and talk to them. And the reward is knowing that you did it.
Yeah.
Knowing that you did it. If you don't get butterflies in your stomach the minute you put that microphone on, you're in the wrong business. If you think that you're so great that you can just go in there and wing it, because the best of us The real Don Steele, Bobby Ocean, I've never met one of them who, when I get with them and we take all the fluff away and it's just them and I in the office, eye to eye, and I say, do you get nervous when you go on the air? Shit, yeah, I do. Well, good.
That's interesting.
Don't ever lose that. Don't ever lose that. Because the day that you think you can go in there and wing it, that's the day that you become complacent, and sooner or later it's going to get you, and sooner or later that's what's going to get you canned. Because I'm going to call you in the office and say, that's it. You're not exciting anymore. Right. And when you get off the air, you better have butterflies in your stomach. And if you air check every day, you can't wait to get in your car and drive home and pop that cassette, back then it was cassette, in your car and listen to yourself and stuff and going home. One of the best things about being a program director, and I mean this from my soul, is that one of the best things that I had going for me, as this guy here, Pete Salant, said about coaching and that I was a mentor, and you see a lot of this on the radio sites that they say that they learned from me that I was a good coach. I was good because I had a way of sitting someone down and saying, now, do you hear the way you said that? This is how you could have said it better. Instead of what a lot of program directors do, they're more interested in the title and being the cop.
Right.
And blah, 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 you will there if I hear you, blah, 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 blah. I say, well, why would you say it this way when you could have said it this way? Mm-hmm. And you used a double negative, and you and instead of doing it this way, think about doing it this way. So when you go on the air, did you think about that? Did you write it down? I realize a record's only 3 minutes, but that's your job when you're in the control room.
Yeah.
You got to be exciting. Think about something. How could you tie it in to something that's happening locally? Could be a concert, could be a television show, could be an event.
Could be the weather.
It could
be
whatever.
Right.
Whatever. You know, when you just go in, just don't say partly cloudy. Just say, aren't we great about the weather that we have in Southern California? That's why we're here. But we've got a little change here. It's going to be partly cloudy with a chance of rain. Mm-hmm. But don't worry. Being Southern Californians, we know the sun is coming right out around the corner. Expect a high. Do something. Just don't sit there like a bump on a log. You're a radio announcer. You're a personality. Reflect that. Be somebody.
Imagine that.
Be somebody.
Imagine allowing someone on personality.
Yeah, I was just saying, thinking to myself, the last 2 minutes that Chuck just gave us, the little scenario he just gave us, is probably a good place to stop, because here we are in 2018, and I don't think any of those things that he talked about can be applied to radio today, unfortunately. I mean, there may be a couple of program directors somewhere out there that behave that way, but I'm speechless, actually, based on what you just said and applying it to what we're hearing today, and they're worlds apart.
That's the whole problem. He does have to tell one more story, though.
Okay.
And I know we're running long.
No,
but
we're not.
Okay.
We don't run long here. You know that. We go until we're done.
How did K West come about? And how did it end?
Yeah, we got to find that out.
Sure. K West came apart because of something that I should have seen happen before it happened. I left KHJ, and Jerry Cagle called me. He was the program director at KFRC, and he was having problems up there, and he said, how about coming up here? Will you want to consult us up here? And I did. I went up to KFRC, and I was helping him put a format together similar to what we were doing down there. Yeah. And San Francisco's almost the same type of a market, because at that time we had another thing going well for us, was the disco explosion that was going on. In San Francisco, being a gay community, the disco was the big thing. So I did plug a lot of the rhythm and the black music, and along with the white music at Top 40. So I went up there helping him, and he just so happened he wanted to fire a disc jockey. And he said, why don't you help me up here and go on the air for me? I did. So, in fact, one of the best I ever sounded on the air was at KFRC.
Yeah.
We've got air checks, and people have said that. They said, my God, man, you were dying. And I was, because you know what? I had all the compression of KHJ and Los Angeles and all that was on my shoulders. It was like a ton of bricks that was taken off me.
It was just fun.
And I went up there, and just told me, go on the air, be a disc jockey. And I was. I had no pressure. I went all the things that I taught other jocks to do, I was doing. I was having a blast. And I did. I have air checks, and it was really a good time. It was really. I got them new jingles and stuff. I got the rhythm of the thing there. And so I got a phone call. One day she calls me and she said, Tim Sullivan's trying to get in touch with you. And she said, here's his number. I said, throw it away. She calls me a couple days later. She said, he's calling left and right. He wants you to call. He said it's an emergency and he must talk with you. All right, I took the number and I called Tim. And he says, and he was at K-Hits. And he's saying, listen, I want to run something by you. I got to have an answer. He said, are you interested in coming back to L.A. to program? I said, well, that is a big question. You'd have to give me tell me something about it. He said, I've got a chance to take over a station in L.A., and I want to know if you're interested in being a programmer. I said, you got to tell me what station. I said, is it AM? No, it's FM. I said, oh, what kind of signal it's got? Oh, it's got a good signal. It's got a good signal. I said, before I tell you yes, I said, because right off the cuff, I'd say I'm somewhat interested, but it's going to have to be the radio station, where it is in the numbers, who are they competing against, what kind of format. It's going to be your format, what you did at KHJ. I said, oh, well, that's interesting. Now I said, before I could tell you, I got to know the signal. What station is it? He said, you can't tell anybody. You can't. Okay, I won't tell anybody. K-West. I said, oh, K-West. Now that's interesting. So I said, well, let me think about it. Well, I gotta get an answer because I didn't take the job yet. And if I go in there, I want to go in on a package with the program director and a thing. I said, give me 24 hours. So now I'm doing a little research on K-West, and I said, oh, this station's got potential. This could do something. So I said, all right. I said, but I'm going to need a contract. And I said, a very specific contract. Well, what's it going to be? I said, well, I could tell you right off the bat. I said, I'm going to have to compose a contract. But one thing right off the bat is the first thing is complete autonomy in programming. Because during Tim Sullivan's time at KHJ, and if you remember, Doug, the consultant, and it was a big name.
I'm trying to remember.
Oh, boy.
During your period?
Yeah, during my period.
Are you talking about, you're not talking about
Moyes. Bill Moyes.
Bill Moyes.
Bill
It
Moyes.
wasn't Magid.
No.
That was before.
Yeah, that was before. Bill Moyes and Associates out of Santa Cruz.
That's right.
And he drove me nuts, and he used to say, well, I told you about metric weather or satellite weather. And I said, and he'd write me a memo. Well, I don't hear what we. I said, well, if you don't hear what we talked about, it's not because I didn't hear what you said. It's because I'm just not going to use it. Well, he drove me nuts on a lot of different stuff, and I said, no consultants. I'll do it complete autonomy. Nutshell, Richard. That's where I made my mistake at K-West to think that Tim Sullivan would ever honor any contract. Any contract. So when I went in there, when I went in there, he did all right because I got jingles. I went to Tuesday production. I got jingles. I was very happy with the jingles. I put in the format. I hired good people. I wanted to bring over Rick Dees, and Tim Sullivan talked me out of it because it was too much money. And Rick, at the time, was not working. He was out of KISS. And so we talked. He said, yeah, I'd love to come to work for you again. He said, could we come up with something? And Sullivan saying, he's out of work. He'll take any amount of money. And I go, blah, 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 blah. And so he wanted London and Engelman from KROC because it would be an easy sell to the agencies. That's all Tim Sullivan was about, selling time. That's all he cared about. And so I went along with it. It was in the infancy period. I shouldn't have. I should have stuck to my guns and said I want Rick Dees. But I went along with it. Then he came where he wanted USC basketball because there's no other station in L.A. that's doing USC basketball. And I said, absolutely not. And him and I, and then we went with other stuff. There was a buyer that wanted $56,000 will buy you a home in Ventura, blah, blah, blah. And they were putting 6 spots an hour. I said, no, it ain't going to happen. You can't have this annoying commercial playing 6 times an hour. 56 dollars. It would be like today, that commercial Zipa. Hi, this is Jimmy for Zipa with that New York accent. It's snoring. It's just throw you out of bed at that Zipa. Can you imagine hearing that 6 times an hour? Every single hour.
That's not like Sit and Sleep ever runs ads like that.
Yeah. So him and I went head to head. And finally, I said that was it. Oh, and then in my contract, I had 10 points. I said that if you want to get rid of me, it's a 1 year out. You got to pay me 1 year out. From the time you want to get rid of me, it's not a 1 year contract, but from the time you tell me you want me to leave, you got to pay me 1 year. I can give you, 30 days? I could give you 30 days. Well, I just went to him one day. I had enough. It wasn't going anywhere. I wanted billboards. I wanted bumper stickers. Some clown comes in from Chicago, and they've got this clown thing, K West 106. They wanted to change the call letters, and I said, are you crazy? Are you crazy? You got K West. Yeah. Los Angeles, the West Coast. Yeah. Are you kidding? You want to change K West with recognizable call letters? They've had that license plate. Remember the billboards forever and ever and ever with K West? Now change the logo, change the image, but you don't change the moniker. You don't get rid of K West. You do if it's KG Boo MB. Change the call letters, but you don't change K West. So I fought them on that. Equipment-wise, it was a real toilet. It was terrible on the equipment. You guys had
there when I interned there.
Okay.
I was trying to make that work during the Magic 106 days.
Coming from KHJ, the equipment that we had there, and you go into – and here's another thing. I had to bring in an engineer who just died last year, 56 years old, who I had at Y103. And the first engineer that was there, they didn't want to get rid of him. He was old, in his late 70s. And I said, compression. I want compression. Yeah. And he says, what compression? We've got this Audio Max and this, whatever the two things were. There was
Automax and Volumax.
And what was the other one? One brought it up. The other one kept it down.
Automax and Volumax.
There you go. Volumax and Automax. And so he says, I got them cranked up all you want. I said, well, then get rid of it. I said, I want something on the microphone. Well, there isn't nothing. There's nothing out there you can put on the microphone. I said, yes, there is. There's a Yuri LA4. And that's what you put on the microphone. I said, and they're cheap. They're $150. I ran into a big problem with the engineer. He told me I had compression on the brain because I used to say, I don't hear compression. I said, I realize you can't compress FM like you can AM. I understand that, but I want some compression. I want to know the difference when the disc jockey talks and the music just falls out. I don't want to be competing. I want everything to be at a level right there, and I want a slight reverb. You don't put reverb on FM. Well, we are now. So he drove me nuts and everything. So with all the things that were going on at that radio station, salesmen were out of control with what they sold. Out of control. I decided, why am I going to go through this all over again? And with Tim Sullivan, this time I don't have a Dwight Case, the president of RKO, to be my buffer, to come and take my side and save me from doom. Yeah. It was all on to me. So I said, my wife and I, we talked about it, and I said, this is a good time that I retire from radio. And that was it. I mean, that was the decision. I knew it would. So, Richard, to answer your question, it could have been a great thing. It could have been, because on that FM, I could have done exactly the right thing to do for LA.
Exactly what they talked about, KHJ on FM.
KHJ on FM with going after the inner city. I did at that point there, being FM. Now I'm equal with LOS and MET. Yeah. Now I'm an equal partner here. I don't want to do what they're doing. I want to go and do that inner city. I want where those big diaries go. That's why I brought in Benny Martinez. Mm-hmm. I had to get him out of in El Centro, California. I had to get this guy who could speak Spanish and thing, and he was good. He had the energy that I was looking for, and so I brought him in to speak half Spanish. Do a sentence, do it in English, and do it in Spanish. Wherever you can, talk double, and give me street Spanish. Don't give me the proper Castilian Spanish. Right. You talk street Spanish. And it was working, and everything was starting to go. Even London and Engelman in the morning, I was surprised because Ron Engelman, he was the writer. He had great bits. Yeah. And John London, he, just went along with them and everything and stuff. So and Bobby Ocean, same thing, getting him on early before the bars open to do the production.
You mean before Valentine Jones showed up?
Yeah. So, I mean, everything was going. I had the crew that I wanted. Even China Smith was coming around. I worked with China in Grand Rapids, Michigan, years ago, and he was one of the only ones that I saved from the old crew. There was really nobody to save over there. They didn't want to do top 40. They were part of the position 93. So K West, and it's too bad, Richard, because K West could have happened. It could have happened, but not with Tim Sullivan.
Before Kiss was taken off.
Yeah,
that's why I always said it could have done it.
Before Kiss was taken off. You're absolutely right.
And speaking of an urban signal, look what happened with Power.
Yeah,
when it turned into Power 106, look what happened to them. Through the roof. It was instant huge hit.
Yep.
Much like the way you described the magic of radio and the magic of everything, your experiences at K West really do sum up what we see today in radio. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Mike, because you could take that sound of that radio station on FM, and it's almost a mirror of what was going on K and other little nuances. You could take that today, plant it right here, update the music, and there you have it. I mean, that's what radio lacks. It's so lacking.
But you're talking also about the intrusion from the sales department, intrusion from everywhere else.
Isn't that broadcasting, Mike? You're going to find it anywhere. Yeah. At ABC, I'm sure you saw that too.
Absolutely.
Programming is always the bastard child of the company or the corporation. They're always going to take the back seat because we spend the money and they make the money. Right. And when you get managers and owners all they see is the bottom line. Programming is a means to an end, but they're the people that take it. They're those hippie disc jockeys. For the first, I've had some good stations that I worked with, and they listened to programming, and when they were in the toilet and they saw numbers come in where they could charge more for commercials, then all of a sudden it was a light that went off in their head. Like manna from heaven.
Programming means something.
Yeah. Wow, I think I'll go along with this for a while. But there's always the stumbling blocks, and programming's always going to lose. KHJ was the first one that gave me an open door, carte blanche to do it, and that's why a station that was so bad, so in the bottom basement, and come to where we were. And, and just finishing, because I know time is of the essence. Our chief engineer here is closing us down here.
Not at all. We can go all day.
I just wanted to say, and I want to reiterate this. I've touched on it, but I was very blessed. I was very fortunate. This whole KHJ thing, just like it is here today. I mean, it's 35 years later, and look, somebody is taking the time and the effort to talk about a golden magic time in radio. And being a person who was young with young ambitions and getting a break to start in radio in the Navy, Armed Forces Radio Network, getting my start there and pursuing it from small. I've had a motorhome with more power in my CB linear, with a linear on the CB. I had more power there than 3 or 4 of my early radio stations, and that's no lie. That first station, WWCO, 250 watts night with a bad signal at that. But nonetheless, it was for somebody to be in radio and to go through all the different things, the good stations, the bad stations, the good station with jingles, the bad jingles, the bad program directors, the good program directors, good owners, good companies. You can flush them all out. You could play a checkerboard, move them here and there. It's all the same. But to know during all that time that there was a radio station in Los Angeles that made so much noise, so much light, so much of a spotlight, so much of an explosion that came in with Boss Radio. KHJ was like the best of the best. They don't get any better. It's what everybody wanted to aspire to. And to sit on the outside saying, yeah, I'll get there. I want to, someday, and never saying, just like DRC, those people that said, you said that you wanted to stop your career there, and I was there in 18 months, and I said, well, what the hell? I'll go to KHJ. And actually getting here at a time when there were so many things going for what a top 40 radio announcer aspired to. The music was right. It was a disco explosion that was mass appeal, accepted by all people in the top 40 mass appeal audience. There was the station that gave me the autonomy to get rid of John Sebastian Michael Spears and all the bad things that were going on with a legendary station. They gave to me freely to do what I wanted to do. Thank God that after all these years, you can look back. I had the foresight to be able to say, this legendary radio station needs more than just a format change. It needs what the station has always been, right. The legend of KHJ, to have the people. See, I had the format. I had the mechanics. I had the schematic. But it was the people, like this guy right here, who was instrumental in the sound of the radio station. His boss, Bob Canner, who was the best of the best, the disc jockeys that I was able to pay phenomenal money to bring them in and to listen to me and to have a time that everybody was on the same page. Everybody wanted the same thing. We all were screaming to get this beautiful radio station back to some prominence. And we did it. And we did it. It was a dream come true. It was a dream to come to KHJ. It's another thing to be the program director of this legendary radio station from nowhere and to give it one last breath for all of us in radio. Yeah. For all of us who ever walked into a radio station and sat behind a microphone or pushed a button on a machine. It's for all of us. And that's what happened with KHJ in that one magical time, which will never be, it'll never happen again. And for those of us who were there, and for me, who gets the credit, like you said, maybe not enough credit, but I don't mind because I know I did it. Right. And that's all that's important. And I got guys like you who recognize it. And I have friends who were there who know exactly what we did. And nobody, with recognition or not, can ever take that away from us. And God bless the memory of 93 KHJ.
There you go.
Chuck, thank you so much for your passion and sharing that passion with us. It really was a great couple hours.
Great. I'm happy to do it. I'm just happy there's that interest. I'm flattered. I'm flattered after all these years that just like when somebody tells me what you say about me in a column, I'm blessed to have that memory still live.
Yeah, and for those who were here to hear it, we were blessed too.
Absolutely. And Douglas, thank you for adding another dimension to this conversation.
Sure.
With the jingles and everything else. It really was a magical couple hours, and another document of the history of LA radio. But this was a giant one. And thank you again, Chuck.
Can we have a jingle before we leave, Mike?
Absolutely.